Welcome back to another story on God of Fiction. This time, we're bringing you, what if Alastor the Radio Demon adopted Harry and he arrived at Hogwarts with Hellfire magic? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Boy Under the Stairs. The cupboard smelled like dust and old spiders and the particular kind of quiet that settles into spaces where people have been forgotten. Harry Potter was 6 years old, and he had lived in the cupboard under the stairs for as long as he could remember. He didn't think about it much anymore, the way the slanted ceiling caught his forehead if he sat up too fast, the way the single bare bulb flickered when Dudley stomped past overhead, the way Aunt Petunia's voice could travel through 3 walls and still sound like it was meant specifically for him. These were just facts. Like the sky being gray over Little Whinging most mornings. Like the fact that his name, according to Dudley and Dudley's friends, was mostly Freak. He was sitting cross-legged on his thin mattress, turning a beetle over in his fingers, watching it try to right itself, when the television in the living room suddenly turned off. That was unusual. Vernon never turned the television off voluntarily. Vernon became the television on weekends, merging with the couch in a slow, terrible symbiosis. Harry tilted his head and listened. Silence. Then, and this was the part that made the beetle forgotten entirely, a sound came from outside. Not footsteps. Not a car. Something like radio static, warm and layered, with a faint echo underneath it like a voice speaking from somewhere very far away. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then it stopped. Harry pressed his ear to the cupboard door. Aunt Petunia's heels clicked once across the kitchen floor and then went silent. The doorbell rang. Vernon answered it, because Vernon always answered the door with the specific energy of a man who believed all unexpected visitors were either Jehovah's Witnesses or worse. Harry heard the door open. He heard Vernon's preparatory throat clear, the one that meant I am about to be very firm with someone, and then he heard nothing at all for a long moment. Good evening, said a voice. Harry had never heard a voice like that. It was smooth and bright and carried like a radio broadcast, with something underneath it that wasn't quite an accent and wasn't quite an echo but was both of those things and something else entirely. It was the kind of voice that made you feel like you were being recorded. I'm looking, said the voice pleasantly, for the boy. Vernon said something. Harry couldn't make it out, it was low and strangled, the kind of sound Vernon made when the quarterly report was bad or when the neighbor's dog got into the garden. Said the voice, thoughtfully. I didn't ask about your opinion of the boy. I asked where he was. Harry climbed off the mattress very carefully and pressed himself against the cupboard door, eye to the thin crack at the frame. He could see the entrance hall. The front door was open. Vernon was standing with his back to Harry, and he was, and this was the remarkable part, completely still. Vernon Dursley was never still. Vernon fidgeted, Vernon blushed, Vernon filled rooms with his particular brand of aggressive presence. Right now he was a statue. His hand had gone white around the door handle. The man in the doorway was tall. Taller than Vernon, which wasn't common. Vernon was built like a slab of bad decisions. This man was lean and dressed in something that might have been a suit if suits were this shade of deep red-black, and he had a walking stick with a microphone head on the end of it, which Harry thought was perhaps the strangest walking stick he'd ever seen. His hair was dark and slicked back and his smile was the kind of thing that appeared in dreams where you weren't quite sure whether you were the one being hunted or the one doing the hunting. He had red eyes. That should have been terrifying. Harry filed it away as interesting. Ah, said the man, and his gaze moved past Vernon and found the crack in the cupboard door with the precision of a searchlight. There you are. Alastor, though Harry wouldn't know his name for another 10 minutes, stepped past Vernon Dursley the way weather steps past a fence post. Unstoppable. Inevitable. Entirely unconcerned with the obstacle's opinion. Vernon made a sound. Shoo, said Alastor, without looking back. He crouched down in front of the cupboard door. Up close, Harry could see the stitching on his jacket was wrong, not broken, just wrong, like thread that moved when you weren't looking directly at it. The radio static was still there, faint and warm, emanating from him the way heat comes off sun-warmed stone. He knocked twice, lightly, on the cupboard door. "You can open it," he said. "Or I can. I have no preference." Harry considered this for approximately 2 seconds, then opened the door. The man's smile widened. It was sharp at the edges and warm in the middle, which was a combination Harry had not previously thought possible. "Harry Potter," said Alastor. It wasn't a question. "You've been living in a cupboard." "Yes," said Harry. "For how long?" Harry thought about it. "Always, I think." Alastor's smile didn't change. His eyes, however, those red, terrible, deeply amused eyes, went very briefly to the hallway where Vernon had not moved, and something passed through them that was not smile-shaped at all. Then it was gone. "How extraordinary," said Alastor, in a tone that made extraordinary sound like something had just become very unfortunate for someone else. "Well. Come out of there, my boy. I have a great many questions for you, and cupboard acoustics are notoriously poor." Harry came out of the cupboard. He didn't know why. Later, he would think about it and decide it was because the man hadn't looked at him the way people usually did, with impatience or annoyance or that particular blankness of someone who has already decided you're not interesting. He had looked at Harry the way Harry looked at beetles. Like he was genuinely curious what would happen next. They sat at the kitchen table, because Alastor walked into the kitchen and sat down with the ease of someone who owned the place and everyone else simply adjusted around this fact. Aunt Petunia materialized in the doorway with the expression of a woman who desperately wanted to say something but had forgotten all available words. She was looking at Alastor the way a rabbit looks at a fox when the fox has sat down in the warren and begun reading a newspaper. "Tea," said Alastor, without looking at her. Aunt Petunia made tea. Alastor set his walking stick against the table and looked at Harry with his chin resting on his laced fingers and his expression thoughtful and bright and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with the tea. "Tell me about yourself," he said. Harry blinked. No one had ever said that to him. "What do you want to know?" "Everything interesting." "Start there." Harry thought about it seriously, the way Alastor's tone suggested the question deserved. "I make things happen," he said finally. "When I'm scared or angry. Things move or break or, once I ended up on the school roof." Alastor seemed profoundly unsurprised. "And do your family find this interesting?" "They find it wrong," Harry said. "Of course they do." Alastor tilted his head. "Do you find it wrong?" Harry looked at his hands. Small hands, thin, with a small scar on the left thumb from when he'd been pulling weeds in the garden and the clippers slipped. "No," he said. I find it like it's mine. Like it belongs to me." Alastor smiled then, and it was different from the one he'd worn at the door. That one had been a weapon. This one was, Harry didn't have a word for it yet. He would come to understand later that it was the smile Alastor wore when something had genuinely delighted him. "Excellent answer," said Alastor. "Now. I would like to make you a proposal." Behind him, Vernon made a noise from the hallway. Alastor raised one finger without turning around and Vernon went silent. "A proposal," Harry repeated. "You have magic," Alastor said. "Real magic. Wild and untrained and frankly crying out for a proper education. Your family," his voice did something layered and musical and faintly terrifying on the word family, "are clearly unsuitable custodians for a child of your particular nature. I am proposing that you come with me." Harry looked at him steadily. "Where?" "Somewhere significantly more interesting than this," said Alastor, glancing around the aggressively beige kitchen with an expression of refined suffering. "Who are you?" "Alastor." He said it like a title and a name simultaneously. "I am, let's say, a man of considerable influence in a place you haven't visited yet." "Are you a wizard?" Alastor's smile curved sideways. "I am something older than a wizard, my boy." He picked up his tea and studied it. You would be my ward. My responsibility. I would teach you things that no school curriculum has ever attempted, and you would, I expect, be extraordinarily good at them. When you're old enough, you'd attend Hogwarts, that's the wizarding school, you'll find it adequately charming. But first. 5 years with me. He set the cup down and met Harry's eyes. I won't pretend it will always be comfortable. But I will promise you this, you will never be forgotten again. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, Dudley was making the floorboards creak under his specific gravitational presence. The bare bulb in the cupboard doorway flickered once. Harry thought about the cupboard. He thought about the word freak in Dudley's voice. He thought about the way Aunt Petunia looked through him at the breakfast table like he was furniture she was tired of tripping over. He thought about the roof, about that 3 seconds of impossible altitude and the feeling in his chest that had been the most alive he'd ever felt. He looked at Alastor. Okay, he said. Alastor stood, walking stick in hand, smile in place. Splendid. The paperwork, and there was paperwork, which Harry found surprising and Alastor found amusing, was completed in under 20 minutes. This was because Alastor produced documents from his jacket pocket that already had Vernon and Petunia's signatures on them, which was either tremendously efficient or genuinely ominous, and Vernon and Petunia seemed disinclined to investigate which. Harry packed his things. This took 4 minutes, because his things were a broken set of crayons, 3 books from the school library he'd forgotten to return, a marble he'd found on the playground that was a very specific shade of green, and the clothes on his back. He didn't have a bag. He wrapped everything in his second-best shirt, his best shirt being the one he was wearing, and knotted it. Alastor watched him do this from the doorway of the cupboard, and his expression during this process was something Harry didn't look at directly, because it felt private in a way he didn't have language for yet. Is that everything? Alastor asked. Yes. Itchem. Alastor reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small bag, actual leather, with a clasp, and held it out. Then I suppose we should start the process of getting you more things. Harry took the bag. It was warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, though there was no sunlight in the cupboard. He put his bundled shirt inside. It fit, even though the bag was clearly smaller than the shirt. He looked up at Alastor. Pocket dimensions, said Alastor pleasantly. We'll cover the theory on Tuesday. They went out through the front door. Harry didn't look back at the house. He had thought he might, had thought there would be some pull, some gravitational sentimentality about leaving the only place he'd ever lived, no matter how much he'd hated it. There wasn't. The door closed behind them and it was like a sound stopping. Like the end of static. Alastor walked down the front path with his walking stick clicking on the concrete, and the evening was cool and grey-purple and the streetlights were just beginning to hum on, and Harry walked beside him with his leather bag and his green marble in his pocket and felt, strange. Not frightened. Not excited, exactly. Something that was a mixture of both and was also neither. Awake, maybe. Like something in him that had been sleeping without knowing it was sleeping had just opened its eyes. Where are we going? Harry asked. To the gate, said Alastor. What gate? The one that isn't there until we need it. Harry looked where Alastor was pointing, the end of the cul-de-sac, between a lamp post and a hedge, and saw absolutely nothing. Then Alastor stepped to the right and struck the lamp post once with his walking stick and the static sound returned, warmer now, richer, with something musical underneath it, and between the lamp post and the hedge there was a door. It was a very good door. Deep red-brown wood with iron fittings, slightly taller than necessary, with something carved into the frame that Harry couldn't quite look at directly without his eyes sliding away. It was standing freestanding in the concrete with nothing behind it except the evening and the hedge, and it was the most present thing Harry had ever seen, dense with reality in a way that made everything around it look slightly less real. After you, said Alastor. Harry reached out and put his hand on the iron door handle. It was warm. Warmer than the bag. He turned it. The door opened onto fire, not burning fire, not dangerous fire, but fire as landscape, red gold and deep amber, flowing like water through channels in dark stone, and the smell that came through was sulfur and something sweeter, like burning cedar, and the sound was a vast low hum that Harry felt in his teeth and his sternum simultaneously. He looked at it for a long moment. He stepped through. Hell, as it turned out, was not what anyone had advertised. Harry had learned about hell in the abstract the way most English children did, vaguely, through cultural osmosis, filtered through Aunt Petunia's particular brand of disapproval that covered everything from Halloween costumes to Caribbean food. He had understood it to be hot and unpleasant and full of people who had made poor life choices. What he stepped into was a city. An enormous, improbable, luminously strange city that sprawled across a landscape of dark stone and glowing rivers and sky the color of a dying sunset held permanently at the moment before it went out. The buildings were tall and crooked and built in styles that didn't match each other or any earthly architecture Harry had ever seen in books, stacked and cantilevered and draped in neon and firelight. The streets were full of figures that were and weren't human, that moved with purpose and stopped to argue and haggled at market stalls and did, fundamentally, the things that people in cities do, just with more horns and more fire and a general ambient energy that was nothing like Privet Drive. It was loud and strange and massive, and Harry stood at the threshold with his mouth slightly open and felt something happen in his chest, not fear, not awe exactly, but recognition, which made no sense at all and was absolutely true. "Welcome to Pentagram City," said Alastor, stepping through behind him and closing the door, which vanished immediately. "Or as I prefer to think of it, a fixer-upper with potential." "Do you live here?" Harry asked. "I have a residence." "Yes." Are those people, sinners, demons, various?" "The taxonomy is actually quite interesting if you're of a certain scholarly bent, which I suspect you may be." Alastor began walking, and Harry fell into step beside him automatically. "The rules here are different from topside. The physics are negotiable. The magic is older. You'll find that the things you've been doing accidentally up on rooftops will feel considerably more natural here." "Because I'm magical?" "Because this place responds to will and strength and the specific qualities of a soul," said Alastor, "and yours, Harry Potter, is a remarkably interesting specimen." Harry walked beside him through the city and looked at everything, at the demon with ram's horns selling fruit from a cart that floated a foot off the ground, at the pair of figures having an argument in a language that sounded like backwards music, at the way the fire rivers cast golden light up into the sky and made everything look like it was perpetually caught in the last moment of a spectacular sunset, and felt, for the first time in his cognizant memory, curious without the accompanying undertone of fear. "What will you teach me?" he asked. "Everything worth knowing," said Alastor. "That's a very long list." Alastor glanced down at him with those red eyes bright with amusement. "It is. Better start soon, don't you think?" Alastor's residence was a tower. Not a modest tower, an enthusiastic tower, a tower that had clearly been designed by someone who had strong opinions about verticality and absolutely no interest in architectural subtlety. It rose from the edge of one of the city's winding fire channels, dark stone draped in something that wasn't quite ivy but grew like it, threaded through with small glowing things that might have been flowers or might have been something more sentient. The door was red. The door knocker was shaped like a microphone. Inside was warm and large, larger than the outside suggested, which Harry was beginning to accept as a recurring feature of Alastor's world, with rooms that seemed to rearrange their purpose depending on what was needed. There was a study that smelled like old wood and ozone. There was a kitchen with copper pots that moved on their own. There was, on the 4th floor, a room that was clearly meant to be a bedroom, with a bed that was an actual proper bed and a window that looked out over the city's firelit skyline, and Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the bed and the window and the room that was, by any measurable standard, the most space he'd ever been given. "This is yours," said Alastor, from behind him. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You don't know me. You spent 20 minutes in my aunt's kitchen." Alastor was quiet for a beat, which was unusual. He had, so far, given the impression of a man who had a ready answer for everything and was slightly bored waiting to deploy it. "Because," he said finally, "I looked at you in that cupboard and saw something that would be a very great shame to waste. And I am," a pause, "with something wry in it, not in the habit of letting interesting things go to waste." Harry turned around. Alastor was leaning against the door frame, walking stick in hand, and his expression was the same one from the kitchen table, the one Harry didn't have a word for yet. "Is that the only reason?" Harry asked. The pause this time was shorter. "It's the first one," said Alastor. "Go to sleep, Harry. We start your education at dawn." He left. His walking stick clicked down the corridor, and then there was quiet. Harry turned back to the window. The city glowed beneath him, red gold and impossible, alive in ways he couldn't name yet. He put his hand against the glass and felt it warm under his palm. He was 6 years old and he had left the only place he'd ever lived and walked through a door between worlds and been given a room and a name and the suggestion of a future, and it was the best day of his life. He went to bed and slept deeply and without dreaming of the cupboard even once. The education began at dawn, as promised. Alastor believed in structure the way a watchmaker believes in precision, not because the world required it, but because imprecision was an insult to the work. Harry learned this immediately and adjusted his expectations accordingly. There were lessons every morning, 6 days a week, ranging from formal to deeply informal depending on what Alastor decided was the highest priority that day, and what Harry quickly learned was that the highest priority changed constantly, and that this was itself a lesson. The early lessons were foundational. Not magic, not yet, but thought. How to observe without revealing that you were observing. How to listen to what wasn't being said. How to enter a room and read it in the 3 seconds before anyone registered your entry. Alastor drilled these with the same cheerful relentlessness with which, Harry imagined, very good chess players taught their students, by playing them constantly and letting them lose until losing became informative rather than discouraging. "You looked at my hands," Alastor said, after one such exercise. "When I walked in." "They tell you what someone's about to do," Harry said. "Sometimes. They also tell you what someone wants you to think they're about to do." "What else did you look at?" "Your feet." "And?" Harry thought. "Your weight was on the right. You were going to come left. And you looked at my hands first, which means you almost missed it." Alastor sat across from him and folded his hands together, perfectly at rest in the way cats are at rest, not relaxed, but conserved. In any encounter, the first thing you read should tell you the most important thing. In my case, the most important thing is not what I'm going to do with my hands. "What is it?" Harry looked at him. Really looked. At those red eyes, bright and layered, at the smile that was always present and always doing more than one job at once. At the way his stillness was so complete it was its own kind of movement. "What you want," Harry said slowly. "What you're interested in. Whether you've already decided how it ends." Alastor's smile sharpened with satisfaction. "Better. Now, again." The physical training came after the observational work, and it was less fighting than moving. Alastor had theories about the relationship between a body's confidence and a magic's power, and he drilled Harry in posture and stillness and controlled breath with the tenacity of a very opinionated dance instructor. Harry, at 6 and then 7, found this puzzling. By 8, he understood it. By 9, it was habit, and people in the city, demons and sinners alike, had started treating him with the particular careful courtesy they extended to things that were small but felt large. The magic came in stages, and it came differently than Harry had expected. He had assumed, based on nothing, based on the vague childhood sense that his accidental magic was something like fireworks, explosive and bright and uncontrolled, that learning proper magic would be about controlling the fireworks. Directing the explosion. Alastor disabused him of this notion in the second week, in the study, with a cup of tea and the serene certainty of a man who has thought about this more than you have. "Your magic is not fireworks," Alastor said. "Fireworks are incidental. Decorative. They make a noise and then they're gone. He gestured to the fire river visible through the study window, flowing steady and enormous through its channel in the dark stone. You are a river. The question is never how bright you can burn. It's what shape you are and what you're carving. What am I carving? Harry asked. Right now. Your bed. Ask me again in 5 years. The Hellfire lesson started when Harry was 7.5, which Alastor explained was later than ideal but earlier than cautious, and that he had never particularly valued caution over timing. The first introduction was not casting, it was contact. Alastor brought Harry to one of the smaller fire channels, a tributary that ran near the tower's base, barely a foot wide, and told him to put his hand over it. Not in it, Alastor clarified. Over. Harry held his hand 6 inches above the running fire and felt it in a way that was entirely unlike feeling heat. It was more like the fire was aware of his hand. Like it was reading him. What do you feel? Alastor asked. It knows I'm here, Harry said. Hellfire is not blind energy, said Alastor. It is alive, after a fashion. Old in ways that even I can't fully measure. It responds to truth. A pause. Not morality, don't confuse the two. Truth. What you are, what you want, what you're capable of. It will not be wielded by someone who lies to themselves. He looked at Harry carefully. That is why I brought you here before any conventional magical education. Most wizards spend their careers working with magic they only partially understand, because they've never learned to be honest about their own nature. I want better for you. Harry looked at the fire below his palm. It flickered upward, just slightly, toward his hand, like a cat stretching toward being touched. What am I, then? He asked. My nature. That, said Alastor, is what the next 4 years are for. The years in hell were not uniformly lessons. There were days, plenty of days, where the education was simply living, and living in Pentagram City was an education entirely unto itself. Harry met Alastor's associates, which was an interesting word for the collection of beings that circulated through the tower and the radio studio Alastor maintained in the city's broadcasting district. There were demons of various orders and alignments, sinners who had been in hell long enough to have opinions about its architecture, and on 2 occasions, angels who arrived with the energy of health inspectors, professional, tightly wound, and deeply uncertain about what they were looking at when they encountered Harry. He's a human child, the second one said to Alastor, while Harry sat on the study desk eating an apple and reading a book on demonic contract law. He's my ward, said Alastor. That's not, you're not permitted, and yet, said Alastor pleasantly, here we are. Harry turned a page and did not look up. He'd learned enough by then to know that Alastor's and yet was the equivalent of a door closing on a subject. The angel left shortly afterward. He also, critically, made friends, or the hell equivalent, which operated on similar principles but with more explicit acknowledgement of exactly what was being negotiated. Alastor had connections to the Happy Hotel, which was managed by the Princess of Hell, Charlie Magna, and Harry spent enough time there to become comfortable with its various inhabitants. He liked Charlie's relentless optimism because it reminded him of a force of nature. You didn't have to agree with the weather to appreciate that it was impressive. He liked her partner Vaggy's directness. He was entertained by Angel Dust's chaos in the way that someone who'd been raised by Alastor was always going to have a high tolerance for people who didn't care what you thought of them. But mostly he learned. He learned contract law and the specific philosophy of power that Alastor subscribed to, not domination for its own sake, but the cultivation of leverage through genuine superiority, which Alastor distinguished from bullying with the precision of someone who had thought about the distinction carefully. He learned that deals in hell, like deals anywhere, were only as good as the integrity of the person making them, and that integrity was a strategic as much as a moral consideration. He learned broadcasting, actual radio technique, because Alastor found the medium genuinely beautiful and wanted Harry to understand why, and Harry eventually agreed that there was something remarkable in the compression of a voice through space and static, the way it arrived already transformed, already something new. He learned Hellfire. Slowly and with enormous care and with several incidents that required replacing parts of the tower and a sincere apology to the demon 2 streets over whose greenhouse had been caught in a radius effect, Harry learned Hellfire. By 9, he could call it deliberately, a steady flame in the palm, deep red gold and very hot, controlled enough to light a candle without scorching the table. By 10, he could shape it. Not just fire, constructs. A bird that flew 3 circuits of the room before dissipating. A wall of flame that was precisely as thick as he needed it. Chains of fire that wound and held. Alastor watched all of this with the alert, satisfied attention of a craftsman watching good work come together. By 11, in the months before Hogwarts, when the owl had arrived from Minerva McGonagall with Harry's acceptance letter and Alastor had read it with the smile of a man who has been expecting this, Harry stood in the courtyard of the tower in the evening light and called up something that was not just fire. It was fire shaped by will and truth and 5 years of understanding what he was, and it rose around him in a column of deep cardinal red, solid enough to cast shadows, warm enough to feel from across the courtyard, and it knew him the way the river had known his hand at 7 years old, and he knew it back. Alastor stood in the courtyard doorway and watched, and his expression was the one Harry finally had a word for. Pride. Well, said Alastor, when the fire settled and Harry turned around. I suppose Hogwarts will find you interesting. Will they be a problem? Harry asked. Alastor considered this with the air of a man reviewing light entertainment options. Oh, various people will try to be. The headmaster has plans for you that he'll find are no longer applicable. You have a Dark Lord who requires managing. There will be children who attempt social dominance, which is a game you've been playing with demons since you were 7. He tilted his head. None of it will be difficult, exactly. But? Harry read the rest of the sentence in his posture. Alastor smiled. But it will be interesting. And I've always found that interesting is better than easy. Harry nodded slowly. What about you? You won't be there. I will be absolutely everywhere, said Alastor, with serene confidence, in the ways that matter. You have your radio, you can reach me. He walked out into the courtyard and stood beside Harry, looking up at the hell sky with its permanent last light glow. And I will be checking in. You mean interfering? I mean invested. He glanced down. There is a distinction. Harry thought about this. What if I make mistakes? You will. What if they're bad ones? Alastor turned to look at him properly then. Then you learn from them. That's what mistakes are for. You are not fragile, Harry. I've spent 5 years making certain of it. A pause. If there is ever a situation genuinely beyond your capacity, you will know what to do. Harry met his eyes. Those red, ancient, deeply fond eyes. Call you, he said. Broadcast to me, Alastor corrected, with some dignity. I am a radio man. We'll do this properly. Harry laughed. It was a real laugh, open, unguarded, and Alastor's smile in response was the most unguarded thing Harry had ever seen on that particular face, there and gone in a breath like a note from very far away, warm through the static. The night before the Hogwarts Express, Harry sat on his windowsill in the tower and looked out over Pentagram City for the last time before a long absence, and let himself have the feeling he'd been keeping at arm's length all week, which was something between grief and excitement in a proportion that shifted every few minutes. He was going to miss this place. The fire rivers and the crooked towers and the permanent sunset sky. The way the city smelled, sulfur and cedar and the ozone of power, the smell of things that were alive and old and not remotely what anyone had expected them to be. He was going to miss the mornings in the study with Alastor's voice explaining something that sounded like impossibility until the moment it resolved into obvious sense. He was going to miss Alastor in the way that he understood now, clearly, without sentimentality but without minimizing it, that you missed the person who taught you what you were. His trunk was packed. His wand, purchased last week in a shop on the city's outskirts, a wand maker that Alastor knew, a 12-inch constructive ashen wood and hellfire-tempered core that had chosen Harry with a pulse of heat and light that singed the display case on both sides, was in his trunk. His school robes were pressed. His books were organized with the systematic precision of someone who had been taught that preparation was its own form of power. He was ready. He was as ready as 5 years of Alastor's education could make a person, which was, by any reasonable measure, considerably more ready than anyone at Hogwarts was prepared for. He turned the green marble from Privet Drive over in his fingers. He'd kept it all this time, through hell and fire rivers and lessons in contract law and 5 years of becoming someone entirely unlike the boy who'd sat on a thin mattress in a cupboard watching a beetle right itself. He'd kept it because it was the thing from before, and keeping it was a choice, and choices about what to carry mattered. He put it in his pocket. The city glowed. The sky held its permanent light. Somewhere in the tower below, he could hear Alastor's radio playing, something from the 1940s, warm and crackling, the specific comfort of static as backdrop to everything. Harry Potter closed his eyes, breathed in the smell of hell, and thought, ready. He was 11 years old. He had been raised by the radio demon of hell. He was going to wizarding school. Hogwarts had absolutely no idea. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley doesn't know what to do with itself. The portal dropped them in London at 8 in the morning, which Alastor considered an unreasonable hour for anything except radio broadcasts and ambushes. Harry considered it fine. He'd been waking at dawn for 5 years. They arrived in a back alley off Charing Cross Road, not the Leaky Cauldron entrance, because Alastor had his own way into Diagon Alley that predated the pub by about 3 centuries and involved a door in a wall that Harry was beginning to recognize as a recurring motif in Alastor's navigation of the world. The door was different from the one on Privet Drive. Narrower. Older. The iron fittings were shaped like eyes. "Stay close for the first 20 minutes, Alastor said, adjusting his cuffs as they stepped through. "Not because I'm concerned for your safety. Because I want to observe your first impressions, and if you wander off I'll miss them." "You want to watch my face," Harry translated. "I want to watch your reaction," Alastor corrected. "There's a distinction. Faces are theater. Reactions are data." They stepped out onto Diagon Alley. Harry's first impression was sound, a cascade of it, layered and overlapping, voices and the crack of apparitions somewhere ahead and the specific ringing clang of a cauldron shop getting a delivery, and underneath all of it a kind of ambient hum that was magic, just magic, present and saturating the air the way ozone saturates it before a storm. His second impression was color. The shop fronts were cramped and leaning and painted in shades that hadn't agreed on a palette, jewel bright and weather worn simultaneously, and the street itself was cobbled and uneven and full of people in robes that ranged from dignified to deeply optimistic. His third impression was the people themselves, and this was the one that was most interesting. Wizards, Harry noted, moved differently from the inhabitants of Pentagram City. Demons moved with an awareness of their own power that was constant and baseline. Even the lowest-ranking entity in the city carried themselves with the knowledge that they could, under the right circumstances, be dangerous. Wizards moved like people who had power but didn't think about it much, the way people with functioning legs don't think about walking. It made them, Harry thought, slightly incautious. "Observations," said Alastor, beside him. "They're comfortable," Harry said. "Like they don't expect anything to go wrong." 5 years without a significant threat will do that." Alastor began walking, his stick clicking on the cobbles, and people moved out of his way without quite knowing why. "Though I'll note that their last significant threat ended 10 years ago, and some of them still flinch at the name." "Voldemort," said Harry. Several people within earshot went rigid. A witch 3 feet away actually dropped her shopping bag. Alastor watched this with profound enjoyment. "The name," Harry said, studying the reactions with the same attention he'd given interesting new piece of data. "They're scared of the name. They're scared of everything associated with the memory," Alastor said, stepping smoothly around the witch who was fumbling for her dropped bag. "Fear is a perfectly reasonable response to something that nearly destroyed your society. The issue is when fear becomes habit and habit becomes identity. He glanced down. You'll find a great many wizards who define themselves primarily by what they're afraid of. Try not to be too impatient with them. I'm not impatient, Harry said. I'm curious. Alastor made a sound of quiet satisfaction. Yes. That's better. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley like a statement of intent, white marble and imposing angles and the very clear architectural message that the building took money seriously and expected you to as well. Harry had read about it. Reading about it had not fully prepared him for the physical fact of it, which was that it was the most confidently solid thing he'd seen in the wizarding world so far. The bank had no ambiguity about what it was. The goblin at the door looked at Alastor the way a border guard looks at someone whose passport is technically valid but raises questions. Alastor smiled at it. The goblin let them in. Inside, the hall was vast and high-ceilinged and lit by torches that didn't flicker, which Harry found deeply professional. Goblins moved between stations with the clipped efficiency of beings who found the inconveniences of customers to be a professional hazard rather than a feature. The sound of coins and quills and the distant, improbable noise of something very large shifting underground all merged into an ambient score that was, Harry thought, genuinely excellent. They approached a counter. The goblin behind it, older, sharper-eyed than most, with the specific stillness of a creature that had spent decades evaluating the worth of everything it looked at, looked up from its ledger and took in Alastor and then Harry with the same single glance. Alastor, it said. Not with warmth. With the particular recognition of a long-standing professional relationship that had been, occasionally, irritating. Ragnarok, said Alastor. A pleasure, as always. My ward needs access to his vault. The Potter account. Ragnarok's eyes moved to Harry with fresh attention. It was a different kind of attention from the brief dismissal it had initially given him, sharper, recalibrating. Potter, it said. Harry said. Hello. The goblin held his gaze for a moment. Then it said, in the tone of a being that has had a long and complex relationship with the Potter family and has not yet decided how to feel about this new addition to it, your key. Harry produced it. Alastor had given it to him that morning, a small gold key that sat warm in his palm. Ragnarok took it, examined it, and handed it back. Griphook will take you down, it said. There are also several owls and communications from Hogwarts in a side box. They've been accumulating. How many? Harry asked. Ragnarok checked its ledger with the expression of someone who finds the question mildly offensive. 43 letters over the past 5 years. 17 owls have also attempted to find you through other channels. 2 of them required medical attention upon return. It looked up. The headmaster is persistent. He is, Alastor agreed cheerfully, which is one of his better qualities. Have the letters boxed for us, please. The cart ride down to the Potter vault was, objectively speaking, excellent. Harry had been in spaces that moved strangely, hell had several, but the specific combination of speed and darkness and the warm rush of deep underground air was its own pleasure, and he let himself enjoy it with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who hadn't yet decided that enjoyment needed to be dignified. Griphook watched him enjoy it with the expression of a creature that had been making this journey for centuries and had left enjoyment of it somewhere in the early decades. The vault was large. Harry had not had a clear mental image of what a wizarding vault looked like. He'd imagined something modest. What he got was a room the size of a generous apartment, lit by its own ambient gold glow, with stacks of coins and cases of documents and, on a stone shelf along the back wall, a collection of items that were clearly not merely financial. Wands in cases. A few books that hummed faintly. A cloak folded in a box that Harry felt rather than saw, because it had a presence, a depth, like looking into something that went further than its surface. Don't touch the cloak yet, said Alastor, who had appeared at his elbow. What is it? Something that was left to you. We'll discuss it properly before you use it. Harry looked at it for another moment, at the way the folded fabric seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it, at the sense of depth that surrounded it, and then looked away. He had learned that Alastors will discuss it properly meant exactly that. He'd learned it by pushing once, at 8, when Alastor had said the same thing about a particular section of his contract law books, and finding that Alastor's explanations, when given in full, were always worth waiting for. He took a handful of galleons for the day's shopping. Alastor guided the quantity with the precise efficiency of someone who believed over-preparation and under-preparation were equally sloppy, and they rode back up through the dark. They collected the box of letters at the main counter. Harry tucked it under his arm. Outside, on the marble steps, he stopped and opened the most recent one, dated 3 weeks ago, Hogwarts seal, Minerva McGonagall's handwriting. Dear Mr. Potter, I write once more with the fervent hope that this letter finds you, as the previous 42 have not. You are due to begin your first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on September the 1st. Your place has been held. We are aware that your circumstances have been unconventional. Professor Dumbledore asks me to assure you that whatever questions you may have will be addressed upon your arrival. Harry folded it and put it back. Whatever questions I may have, he quoted. He assumes you'll have questions, Alastor said, descending the steps beside him. He assumes I'll be the one who needs briefing, Harry said. He hasn't considered that I might already know more than he expects. Alastor looked sideways at him with approval. He is also, I suspect, curious about where you've been. What's been done with his timeline? Harry thought about this. His timeline, he said slowly. He had plans. He has been headmaster of a school that produced the last Dark Lord, was nearly destroyed by the current one, and relies for its salvation on a prophecy concerning a specific child. Yes, said Alastor pleasantly, he had plans. And now? Now he has an 11-year-old who spent 5 years in hell studying under one of its most powerful residents. Alastor's smile was very light. He'll adapt. He's intelligent enough for that. What he won't do, immediately, is understand. Give him time. I'm not worried about Dumbledore, Harry said. Good. Worry is rarely productive. Now, Alastor gestured down the alley, books, robes, cauldron, and then Ollivanders, though that last one is, in your case, something of a formality. I already have a wand. You already have a wand. Ollivander doesn't know that. It will be interesting to observe his reaction. He paused. Also, I want to eat somewhere on this alley that hasn't made me regret it, and there's a bakery near Madame Malkin's that I recall fondly. Harry looked at him. You come topside enough to have food opinions about Diagon Alley? I have opinions about everything, said Alastor, serenely. Come along. Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions was busy in the preterm way of all shops that have a captive customer base and a fixed deadline, full of first-years and their parents in various states of organized chaos, and the assistant at the door gave Alastor and Harry the fast, professional assessment of someone who had seen every kind of wizarding family and had learned to triage quickly. Harry got up on the fitting platform and held out his arms and let the measuring tape do its work, and next to him, also on a platform, a blond boy with expensive robes already half-fitted looked over with the specific appraisal of someone who categorizes people quickly. First year, said the boy. Yes, Harry said. Hogwarts. That's the usual destination. The blond boy studied him. He had the particular confidence of someone who had grown up being told his opinion mattered, which meant his confidence was real but also untested, which Harry recognized as a meaningful distinction. Draco Malfoy, he said, in the tone of someone who expects the name to do something. Harry Potter, Harry said, in the tone of someone who is watching to see if his name does something. It did something. Draco's expression changed, recalibrated, the way Ragnarok's had, though with more visible processing. Potter, he said. You've been missing. Everyone said. He stopped, reassessed. Where have you been? Abroad, said Harry. Draco seemed to weigh this. Your robes are good, he said, in the tone of a compliment that was also an assessment. Not wizarding made. Harry glanced down at his clothes, dark, well-fitted, nothing flashy, the kind of thing Alastor wore when the occasion required restraint. "No," he said. Draco looked toward the door, where Alastor was standing speaking to Madame Malkin herself with the specific energy of a man engaging in social transaction while simultaneously doing something else entirely with his attention. Draco's gaze settled on Alastor and stayed there for a beat. "Who's that?" he asked. "My guardian," Harry said. Draco looked back at Harry. Something had shifted in his expression, still calculating, but with more caution in the calculation now. "He's not a wizard," he said. "No," Harry agreed. "What is he?" "Something older," Harry said, which was Alastor's own answer, and he used it with the same pleasant finality. Draco seemed to decide to file this for later processing. "Well," he said, and his tone had adjusted, less the opening gambit of social hierarchy establishment, more something that was actually approaching genuine curiosity. "Hogwarts will be interesting with you in it, at any rate." "I expect so," said Harry. The bookshop, flourish and blots, 2 floors, the specific smell of old paper and binding glue and the accumulated energy of a lot of stored information, was the longest stop. Harry moved through it with the systematic attention of someone who understood that a book collection revealed its owner's priorities, and the school list was a starting point, not a ceiling. He got everything on the list and then several things that weren't, guided by the same methodology Alastor had used when stocking his study, breadth before depth, then depth in the areas that proved most essential. He found, on a shelf between advanced potion-making and a volume on magical law, a thin book titled Entities, Aspects, and the Philosophy of Otherworldly Power. It was clearly old and clearly not a first-year text, and it had been shelved there by accident or by someone with an odd sense of organization. Harry pulled it out and opened it. The first chapter was about hell. Not about hell the way people used the word loosely. About hell proper, the dimensional space, and the entities that inhabited it. The description was, not wrong, exactly, but written by someone with second-hand information filtered through several layers of terrestrial wizarding bias, which made it simultaneously informative and faintly amusing. The entry on Radio Demon specifically was 3 paragraphs, described their powers in academic terms that were mostly accurate and concluded with the assessment, not considered a significant risk to the living, as radio demons rarely intersect with the mortal world in any meaningful capacity. Harry thought about the 43 unanswered letters. He thought about Vernon Dursley frozen at his own front door. He bought the book. The cauldron shop was straightforward. The apothecary was interesting. Harry had studied enough chemistry, in the hell equivalent, to find the intersection of biological material and magical reaction genuinely fascinating, and he spent 15 minutes there longer than intended, which drew no comment from Alastor, who was studying a jar of something on the top shelf with the focused interest of a man who has a use for it. They ate at the bakery near Madame Malkin's, and the pastry was, as Alastor had implied, worth the opinion. "Dumbledore is going to want to speak to you early," Alastor said, "over something made with honey and ground something that wasn't quite almond. He'll be careful about it. Exploratory. He wants to understand what you are before he decides how to manage the situation." "And what will I tell him?" "Whatever you find appropriate," said Alastor. "I will say this, Albus Dumbledore is not an enemy. He is a very intelligent man who is deeply committed to protecting people and is occasionally blinded by that commitment to the point of arrogance. He will likely have made decisions about your life that he considers reasonable and that you will find presumptuous." A pause. "Be honest with him. Honest is not the same as open, you don't owe him your interiority. But lies to Dumbledore are wasted energy. He's too good at finding them." "What about Quirrell?" Harry said. Alastor went still in the precise way he went still when something had shifted from interesting to significant. "What do you know about Quirrell?" "He's in the book from the bookshop," Harry said. "The one on defense against the dark arts. I looked up who'd be teaching it. His background is standard, Cambridge, then Muggle studies, then data after a sabbatical that the records describe as a transformative year of travel." He watched Alastor's expression. The gap in the records is what's interesting. The year before he took the data post. No publications. No correspondence. Just absence. Alastor looked at him with the specific expression of someone who is recalibrating their expectations upward. You spent the trip here reading records? I spent the trip here in the Gringotts box with 43 letters, a Hogwarts prospectus, and the first chapter of every book I bought, Harry said. The records are public through the Ministry Archive. You can access them through the Magical Library catalog. A pause. When did you learn to access the Ministry Archive? When I was 9, from the book on magical law. You didn't specifically say not to. Harry met his eyes without apology. Alastor said nothing for a moment. Then he smiled, the real one, the unguarded one, there and gone. Quirrell, he said, is a problem for September. But your instinct about the gap is correct. File it. Watch him. What am I watching for? You'll know it when you see it. The smell of something that's two things at once. Alastor picked up his cup. You've spent 5 years around entities with layered presences. You'll recognize it. Harry nodded slowly, filing. And if I'm right? If there's something in him? Then you are careful, said Alastor, without any lightness in his voice. Not frightened. Not passive. Careful. There is a significant difference. He looked at Harry directly. Whatever is sharing Quirrell's body is dangerous. Possibly extremely so. You are 11 years old and you are formidable, but formidable is not invincible, and I need you to understand that distinction. I do understand it, Harry said quietly. Good. Alastor set down his cup. Then let's get your owl and go to Ollivander's. The owl chose Harry before Harry could choose the owl, which was not, technically, how it was supposed to work, but the snowy owl in the third cage along had been watching him since he entered the shop and made its preferences clear by extending a talon through the cage bars and taking hold of his sleeve when he walked past. Harry looked at the talon gripping his sleeve with the precise and considering gaze he gave anything that made an unexpected move, then looked at the owl. The owl looked back with amber eyes that had the bright, steady intelligence of a creature that has decided something and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. She wants to come, said the shop owner. I noticed, said Harry. He named her Sable, which was partly because of her coloring at the wingtips and mostly because it sounded like something that would look good embroidered on a perch. Alastor watched the owl watching Harry with the expression of a man noting that his ward had, apparently, also impressed an owl. An appropriate familiar, he said. She has good taste. She also has opinions, Harry said, extricating his sleeve. All the best creatures do. Ollivander's was last, and Harry walked in with Sable on his shoulder and his wand in his jacket pocket and Alastor positioned in the doorway with the expressed intention of watching. The shop was the kind of place that was small on the outside and expansive on the inside, not through pocket dimensions or magic exactly, but through the sheer density of what it contained, thousands of wand boxes stacked floor to ceiling with the quiet, specific presence of 10,000 choices. It smelled like wood shavings and something older and the particular concentrated quality of potential. Garrick Ollivander appeared from between two shelves the way cats appear, without preamble, at close range. He was slight and ancient and had eyes that were silver pale and very sharp, and they went immediately to Harry's face and stayed there. Harry Potter, he said softly. He said it the way people had been saying it all day, with the specific weight of a name that carries someone else's history, and Harry heard the difference and noted it. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. I wondered when you'd come. Ollivander moved closer, peering at Harry with those silver eyes, and then something shifted in his expression, the way a navigator's does when the landmarks stop matching the map. You've been, he stopped. You're different. I expect so, Harry said. Ollivander looked at his hands, then at his face, then, perceptibly, at the space around him, the way a person who perceives magic structurally looks at the magical signature of someone unexpected. What have you been doing? He murmured. It wasn't quite addressed to Harry. It was the question of a craftsman who had just found something that didn't fit the categories. Being educated, Harry said. Ollivander's silver gaze flicked over his shoulder to Alastor in the doorway, and what crossed his face in that moment was a constellation of things: recognition, recalculation, and something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it, the way the cold feeling before fear is itself a kind of intelligence. "I see," Ollivander said, carefully. "Do you?" said Alastor, pleasantly, from the doorway. Ollivander looked back at Harry. "You came for a wand," he said. "Shall we?" "I have one," Harry said. He reached into his jacket and brought it out, 12 inches, ashen gray, with a winding grain that looked almost like a river in cross-section, warm in the hand, the core a thread of hellfire-tempered material that Alastor's contact had refused to name directly. He set it on the counter between them. Ollivander looked at it. He reached out very carefully and picked it up, and the moment he held it something flickered through his expression, warmth, unmistakably, like a small fire touching his hands, and he pulled it back in less than 2 seconds and set it down with the careful respect of a craftsman encountering another craftsman's work. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "A maker I know," Harry said. "The core," Ollivander stopped. "I've never felt a core like this. It's not phoenix, not dragon, not unicorn. He looked up. "It's old." "Yes," Harry said. Ollivander was quiet for a moment, looking at the wand on his counter. Then he reached out and ran 2 fingers along its length without picking it up, and his expression was the one craftsmen wear when they are deeply, genuinely engaged. "It chose you," he said. "Not a question." "I chose each other," Harry said, which was the accurate version. Ollivander looked up at him with those silver eyes. "You're going to be very interesting," he said. It was not quite the same as the Sorting Hat and Draco Malfoy saying it. It had more weight. The quality of a man who has been making wands for decades and understands what that word means in the context of a child who carries something like this. "I've been told," said Harry. "By him?" Ollivander glanced past Harry to the door. "Among others." Harry picked up his wand and pocketed it. "How much do I owe you for your time?" Ollivander shook his head slowly. "Nothing. I haven't made you a wand. I've simply," he paused, "confirmed a few things." "Such as?" "That the boy who lived is not what any of us expected." He said it without drama, with the straightforward quality of a man delivering an accurate assessment. "The headmaster will be very surprised." Harry looked at him calmly. "Probably," he said. "That's his problem." Behind him, from the doorway, he heard Alastor make a small, satisfied sound that might have been a laugh. The afternoon was winding toward evening by the time they finished, the alley thinning out, the shop fronts going golden in the slanting light, the specific end-of-day energy of a place settling back into itself after the business of being visited. Harry sat on a bench near the leaky cauldron entrance with Sable on his shoulder and his bags around his feet, sorting through his thoughts the way Alastor had taught him, categorically, without urgency, laying things in order so they'd be findable when needed. Ollivander's words. Ragnarok's recalibration. Draco Malfoy's assessment that something had already been decided about Hogwarts with his arrival in it. The letters from Dumbledore, 43 of them, each one a small data point about the persistence and the specific quality of the anxiety behind it. And somewhere behind the figure of Quirrell, the gap in the record. The absence. The shape of something that wasn't in the shape of the thing presenting itself. "What are you thinking?" Alastor asked, from beside him. "I'm thinking it's going to be busy," Harry said. "It will be. Are you genuinely not worried?" Harry looked at him. "Not about me, specifically. About, all of it." Alastor was quiet for a breath, actually quiet, the radiostatic warmth of his presence present but not broadcasting. "Then, I am many things. Worried is not on the list." He looked at Harry with those red eyes steady and very clear. "You are the most prepared 11-year-old that the wizarding world will have ever encountered. You understand power. You understand leverage. You understand, and this is the rarest thing, that mercy is a form of strength rather than the absence of it. He paused. I am not worried. I am interested in what you'll do with all of it. Harry looked at him for a moment. You're not going to tell me to be careful. You already know to be careful. Telling you again insults the knowledge. Harry nodded. Then, with the directness that 5 years in hell had made natural, I don't want to be away from here. From you. Even though I know I need to be. Alastor's expression shifted. The precise, minimal shift that was his version of something felt rather than performed. I know, he said. And then, because he was Alastor and sentiment required a footnote, I will be deeply interested in your letters. Daily letters. With detail. You want to experience it vicariously, Harry said. I want to remain appropriately informed, Alastor said, with great dignity. Those are different things. Harry almost smiled. I'll write every other day. Every day. Every day, if something interesting happens. Harry. Fine. Every day. Alastor looked at him steadily. And if something beyond interesting happens, something that sits wrong in the way you've been trained to recognize wrong, I broadcast, Harry said. I know. Good. Alastor stood, walking stick in hand, surveying the last of the alley's evening bustle with the particular gaze of a man who is one of the most powerful beings in a specific dimension watching a significantly smaller world go about its business. Then I think, he said, we've done what we came to do. Harry stood, picking up his bags, Sable adjusting her grip on his shoulder with the small imperious weight of a creature that has decided his shoulder is hers now. The alley glowed around them, warm and close and full of its own small magic, and Harry breathed it in, the book dust and cauldron metal and old stone smell of a world that was about to be his, for a year and then another and then the ones after that. Alastor, he said. Thank you. For today. For all of it. Alastor looked at him sideways, and something moved in those red eyes that Harry had learned to read over 5 years of paying attention to things that most people missed. You are, said Alastor, in the tone he used when he meant something and was choosing precision over decoration, the most worthwhile thing I've done in a very long time. It was not a warm statement in the conventional sense. It was not soft or flowery or the kind of thing a guardian was supposed to say to a child. It was honest, and it was Alastor's, and it landed exactly right. Harry picked up his trunk with his free hand and they walked back toward the narrow door in the wall, between the alley's last gold light and the London evening, and for a little while neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was the easy kind, the kind that doesn't need filling, that is itself a form of language between people who've been paying attention to each other long enough to know what the quiet means. The door was there when they needed it. It always was. Chapter 3, The Sorting Hat Has Opinions. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, which Harry knew because Alastor had told him 3 times and the ticket confirmed it, and Sable had woken him at 6 in the morning with the energy of an owl that had decided punctuality was a moral position. Platform 9 3/4 existed in the way a lot of things in the wizarding world existed, sideways to ordinary reality, accessible through a method that would look insane to anyone not expecting it and perfectly straightforward to anyone who was. Harry had walked through dimensional doors since he was 6. He walked through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 with the same energy he brought to everything Alastor had trained into him, measured, observant, unhurried, and came out the other side into the steam and noise of a scarlet train that was doing its absolute best to look magnificent. It was doing well, he thought. The platform was chaos of the warm, purposeful variety. Families clustered around trunks. Owls exchanged opinions. A group of red-haired children were being organized by a small round woman with the specific competence of someone who had run a household of many and was not surprised by any of this. 2 of them were Harry's age, one a girl, one a boy, and the boy was the one who caught his eye first, not because he was remarkable in any individual detail but because he had the face of someone who was trying to look like he wasn't nervous and had not entirely succeeded. Harry recognized the expression. He'd worn it himself, Once, before Alastor had trained the obvious expression of anxiety out of him and replaced it with the less readable internal version. He loaded his trunk and made his way to the train. Sable was in her cage, deeply unimpressed by the ambient owl noise, which she was conveying through posture alone. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk, and settled by the window with the book on entities he'd bought in Diagon Alley. He had approximately 40 minutes before departure and intended to use them. He got about 6 minutes. The compartment door opened and the red-haired boy looked in with the specific expression of someone who has checked several other compartments and found them all either full or occupied by people who gave off an unwelcoming energy. "Is it all right if I sit here? Everywhere else is," he gestured vaguely backward, which communicated complicated without needing specifics. "Go ahead," Harry said, without looking up from his book. The boy sat. There was a beat of quiet. Harry turned a page. "I'm Ron," the boy said. "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." The quality of the quiet changed. Harry looked up at the specific beat of it, the brief recalibration, the visible processing, and found Ron Weasley doing the same thing everyone had done all day, except Ron did it with significantly less social calculation and significantly more genuine reaction, which was, his eyes went wide, then slightly wider, then he visibly decided to say exactly what he was thinking. "Blimey," said Ron. "Are you really?" "Apparently," Harry said. "You've been missing," Ron said. "Like, properly." "For years. My mum was, the whole wizarding world has been," he stopped. "Sorry. That was a lot." "It's fine," Harry said, and meant it. Ron's version of it was the most honest he'd encountered all day. "I wasn't missing, I was just elsewhere." "Where?" Harry considered. "Abroad," he said, which was technically accurate. Ron seemed to accept this with the ease of someone who has grown up in a family that understood the wizarding world was bigger than England. "Right. Is that why you," he gestured at Harry's jacket, which was the same dark, well-cut style from Alastor's world. "Your clothes are different." "I was raised by someone with opinions about clothing," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he grinned, a quick, genuine grin with no social performance in it, and said, "My mom has opinions about clothing too, but they go in the other direction," and gestured at his own robes, which were clearly hand-me-downs, slightly too short in the sleeve. Harry looked at him. Then he smiled back, which was, he noted it, easy. Surprisingly so. "Tell me about Hogwarts," he said. "What do you actually know, versus what are you guessing?" Ron sat forward. "I know loads," he said, with the specific enthusiasm of the youngest son of a family deeply embedded in the wizarding world. "My brothers all went, yeah. Bill was head boy, Charlie was brilliant at Quidditch, Percy's insufferable but academic, the twins are," he paused. "The twins are a force of nature. I've been hearing about Hogwarts my whole life." "What don't you know?" Harry asked. Ron thought about it. "What it actually feels like," he said. "Like, I know all the facts. I don't know the texture of it." Harry looked at him with genuine interest. That was a more sophisticated answer than he'd expected. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll find out together." Ron looked slightly startled, like this was not the sentence he'd anticipated following everything that had come before it. Then the startlement settled into something that was simpler and better. "Yeah," he said. "All right." The witch with the trolley came at 12:30, and Ron produced a collection of home-packed sandwiches that he shared without being asked and ate with the straightforward pleasure of someone who actually liked food rather than performing an opinion about it. Harry bought a selection from the trolley on the basis that he had never had Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and Alastor had failed to mention them in 5 years of education, which he felt was an oversight. The earwax one was genuinely bad. He ate it without changing expression, which Ron found disproportionately funny. "You didn't even flinch," Ron said, slightly awed. "I've eaten things in hell that were," Harry stopped. Ron looked at him. In hell? Harry looked at Ron. He made the assessment in the 3 seconds Alastor had taught him. Ron's expression was not horrified, it was interested, with a side of the specific delight of someone who has just received extremely unexpected information and considers it a gift. That's where I've been, Harry said. For 5 years. My guardian lives there. Ron was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, your guardian lives in hell. Yes. And you grew up there. In hell. Mostly. Ron processed this. Visibly, thoroughly, with the face of a person running through implications. Is that why you said abroad? It seemed simpler. Fair, said Ron, with the unshakable practicality of someone raised in a magical family that had normalized considerable strangeness. What's it like? It's a city, mostly, Harry said. Fire rivers and demons and a permanent sunset sky. Very loud. Good food if you know where to go. He paused. Interesting people. Demons, Ron repeated. Actual demons. And sinners, people who've died and ended up there. And various other entities. Harry watched Ron's face. You're not scared. Should I be? Most people would be. Ron shrugged with the genuine, unperformed carelessness of someone who'd grown up around gnomes in the garden and ghosts at the dinner table and a father who collected plugs. Most people haven't grown up in my family, he said. My dad's obsessed with Muggle stuff, my mum hosts the Hogwarts ghosts for tea at Christmas, and the twins once accidentally summoned something in the attic that took 3 hours and a large amount of degnoming equipment to sort out. He looked at Harry steadily. I'm not scared of interesting. Scared of boring, if anything. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, you're going to be very easy to be friends with. Ron's expression did something that was clearly trying to be casual and succeeding only partly. Yeah, well, he said. Don't make a thing of it. The door opened again around 2 o'clock, and the girl who looked in was immediately different from everyone Harry had encountered on the platform or the train. Not in any dramatic way. In the way that someone is different when their intelligence is their primary quality and they've known it long enough to have made peace with what that costs socially. She had bushy brown hair and alert eyes and she was looking for a lost toad, which she explained with the efficient brevity of someone who had already been through this conversation several times. She looked at Ron. She looked at Harry. She looked, in the specific way that intelligent people look at things, slightly longer at Harry than necessary. You're Harry Potter, she said. Yes, Harry said. I've read about you. Quite a lot. She stepped further into the compartment, Toad apparently temporarily deprioritized. I'm Hermione Granger. My parents are Muggles but I've read every book on the required list twice and several of the supplementary ones. She looked at the book on his lap. That's not on the required list. I know, Harry said. He held it up so she could see the spine. She looked at the title, and her expression did the thing that Harry had come to recognize as the specific response of someone encountering a gap in their research, a brief, focused frown, followed by the resolution to address it. I haven't read that one, she said. Is it good? It's inconsistent, Harry said. The primary sources are strong but the interpretive framework is limited by the author's apparent assumption that everything outside the wizarding world is less significant than whatever's in it. Hermione looked at him with the sharp, recalibrating expression of someone who has just heard a sentence they did not anticipate. Exactly, she said. That's the problem with most wizarding texts. They're written as if the wizarding world is the full extent of the significant. She sat down, Toad entirely forgotten. Where did you study? You weren't at any wizarding school, I checked the records. You checked the records, Harry said. I like to be prepared. No apology. No embarrassment. I like that, Harry said. Ron, who had been following this exchange with the expression of someone watching tennis, said, He's from hell, Hermione. There was a pause. That's, Hermione started, then stopped, then recalibrated in real time, actually consistent with the reading. The magical frameworks developed in extra-dimensional spaces like, she stopped again. You're not joking. No, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked at his hands, and Harry knew what she was seeing because Ollivander had seen it too, the quality of something in the air around him, the faint warmth of a magical signature that was not exactly standard. She was bright enough to read it even without knowing what it meant. Your magic is different, she said. Yes, he said. Can I ask what kind? Hellfire, primarily. Some additional framework. We can discuss it if you want, I have the book. Hermione Granger sat forward with the focused enthusiasm of someone who has just been offered something genuinely excellent. Yes, please, she said. All of it. Ron leaned back with the comfortable expression of someone who has identified his social position in a new dynamic and found it acceptable. I'll just, he said, gesturing at his sandwiches, eat. Harry opened the book and began explaining, and Hermione asked questions that were good enough to make him think, which was, he noted, more than he'd expected from a first-year anything, and the train carried them north through the English countryside while the three of them did the thing that neither of them would have named friendship yet, but that was already, in the ways that mattered, exactly that. The boats across the lake to Hogwarts came after the train and the carriages, and Harry's boat had Ron and Hermione and a fourth student, a round-faced, anxious boy named Neville Longbottom who had found his toad and seemed deeply relieved by this and slightly apologetic about everything else. Neville had the specific quality of someone who was very kind and had been told he wasn't very capable for long enough that he'd started to believe it, which Harry recognized as a particular kind of waste. But the lake was the thing he paid attention to. He'd seen Hell's Fire rivers. He'd seen the city sprawl from his tower window for 5 years. He was not, he thought, someone easily impressed by spectacle. Hogwarts impressed him. It rose from the far shore of the lake with the specific authority of a place that had been what it was for a very long time and had no interest in explaining itself. The towers were real towers, not enthusiastic like Alastor's, but ancient and various and grown over centuries by people who understood that a school needed to be a little bit larger than necessary to feel right. The lights in the windows were warm gold. The reflection in the lake was perfect enough to make the castle look doubled, the real thing and its mirror image equally present, and the whole thing had a presence that Harry felt in the same place he felt the fire rivers, deep, structural, the specific resonance of magic that had been alive in one place for a very long time. Blimey, Ron breathed, beside him. Yes, Harry said, which was the word for it. Neville was clutching his toad with the desperate comfort of someone who needs something to hold. Hermione was looking at the castle with an expression that was almost private in its intensity, the face of someone for whom a place has been an idea for a long time and is now suddenly, irreversibly real. Harry looked at Hogwarts and felt something he hadn't anticipated. Not wariness. Not the tactical assessment that was his default response to new environments. Something older and simpler. The feeling that something was beginning. Not just school. Something he didn't have a word for yet. He put it away for later examination and focused on the approaching shore. Minerva McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. She was exactly as Harry had assembled her from the Hogwarts prospectus and Ron's descriptions and the handwriting of 43 letters, precise, formidable, with the specific quality of someone who had maintained high standards for so long that it had become atmospheric rather than active. She was also, Harry noted in the first 3 seconds, extremely good at reading a room. Her gaze moved across the line of first years with the systematic efficiency of a woman sorting into categories, and when it landed on Harry it stopped. Not long. A beat. Then it moved on. But in that beat, Harry caught it, the recognition, the recalibration, the very brief flicker of something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. She'd been expecting him. She hadn't been expecting whatever she was looking at. He filed it. The speech about the houses was clear and competent, delivered with the economy of someone who had given it many times and had refined it to its essential components. Harry listened with full attention, not because it was new, but because the delivery was new, and delivery told you things about the speaker that content alone didn't. McGonagall believed in what she was saying. That was the important thing. The houses, the values, the school, she believed in it, not performatively, but in the way you believe in something you've built a life around. Harry respected that, even when he wasn't certain he agreed with all the implications. As she turned to leave for the Great Hall, she paused, just briefly, just the smallest interruption in stride, and looked directly at Harry. "Mr. Potter," she said, quietly enough that it wasn't for the group. "We'll speak after the sorting." "Of course, Professor," Harry said. Her expression did something that was, he thought, the beginning of reassessment. The Great Hall was extraordinary and Harry let it be extraordinary for exactly 10 seconds before his attention moved to what was more interesting than the architecture, which was the 4 tables of students who were all currently looking at the first years, and the specific quality of all those gazes. 400+ young wizards, all of them conducting the annual first-year assessment. Who's going to be someone, who's someone already, who came from where? It was, Harry thought, exactly the same game that demons played when a new entity arrived in Pentagram City, just with less fire and more school robes. He stood at the end of the first-year line and looked back at all of them with the unhurried patience Alastor had trained into him, and after approximately 3 seconds, a notable portion of the student body looked away first. He'd been doing this with demons since he was 7. The comparative difficulty was low. At the staff table, several professors had noticed. Dumbledore was looking at him with eyes that were bright blue and very sharp and doing exactly what Ollivanders had done, reading the room and finding that the room was not what the map said it should be. He was smiling. The smile was real, which Harry had not fully expected. It was curious and warm and slightly rueful, the smile of a man who has planned for a particular outcome for a decade and has just discovered the outcome had different plans. Harry met his eyes across the hall. Held them for a moment. Then nodded, not deferentially, not aggressively. Simply the acknowledgement of one person to another that they'd seen each other clearly. Dumbledore's smile shifted. Something in it deepened. At the end of the staff table, Harry noticed Quirrell. He had a turban. He was sitting in a way that was, slightly wrong. Harry looked at him for exactly as long as it took to confirm what he'd already suspected, what Alastor had said to watch for, the smell of something that was 2 things at once. 2 presences in one space. One of them nervous and performative, the other banked and still and keeping very carefully quiet. Harry looked away. He didn't let anything register on his face. He filed it in the category marked careful. The sorting hat was ancient and patched and had, beneath the brim, the expression of something that had been doing the same job for 1,000 years and had very fixed ideas about it. It also sang, which Harry had known about and which was still, in practice, more confident than he'd anticipated. The song was good, actually, tightly constructed, thematically coherent. He appreciated the craft. Students were called alphabetically, which meant Harry had time to observe. The hat considered some students for seconds, others for longer, and the audience's response to each sorting had its own texture. The Gryffindor table was loud and warm, Hufflepuff genuinely welcoming, Ravenclaw measured and approving, Slytherin assessing. He watched all of it. Hermione went to Gryffindor in under a minute and sat down with the controlled expression of someone who was very pleased and was managing it. Neville Longbottom went to Gryffindor after a hat that seemed to debate with itself audibly. Neville sat down looking surprised and then relieved and then, slowly, something approaching beginning. Ron went to Gryffindor with the ease of a foregone conclusion and sat down with the specific satisfaction of a family tradition upheld. Then McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry," and the hall went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of waiting. A different kind. The kind that happens when a name lands in a room with its full weight. Harry walked to the stool. He sat down. The hat came down over his eyes. "Well," said the hat. Its voice was dry and layered and genuinely old, the voice of something that had touched 10,000 minds and had long since stopped being surprised by them. "Well, well, well. This is new." "Hello," said Harry. "You're calm," the hat said. It seemed to find this notable. You're just a hat, Harry said. Pleasantly. There was a pause. I've been called a great many things in 1,000 years, said the hat. Just a hat is genuinely new. A beat. Where have you been, boy? You're different. Everything about your magical signature is different. Hell, Harry said. Another pause. I see, said the hat, in the tone of something absorbing an unexpected variable. And who raised you there? Alastor, Harry said. The Radio Demon. Yes. The hat was quiet for a long moment. Harry felt it moving through him, not invasively, not like a violation, but the way a very good reader moves through a book, purposeful and thorough. He let it. He had nothing to hide. Alastor had said secrets were a resource, not a reflex, and you spent them when they were worth spending, not because hiding was a habit. You're not afraid, the hat said. Of any of this? No. Of me? Should I be? Most children are, the hat said. The access to thought is usually the frightening part. I've been trained by something with considerably more access to thought than a hat, Harry said. The hat made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Old and dry and genuinely delighted. Oh, I like you, it said. I don't say that often. I usually just sort. What are you seeing? Harry asked. He was genuinely curious. The hat had touched 10,000 minds. Its perspective was unique. Courage, the hat said, obviously. The specific kind that doesn't require an audience. Intelligence that's been used rather than just accumulated, there's a difference, you know. Most clever children hoard their intelligence. You spend it. A pause. Loyalty of the particular variety that's chosen rather than default, you will not be loyal to people simply because they expect it. Only to those who have earned it. Another pause. Ambition, but not the kind that wants the crown. The kind that wants to be better than what it was. That sounds like all four houses, Harry said. It does, rather. The hat seemed, if possible, to be enjoying this. Dangerous combination, that. Where you go matters less than who you find when you get there. You know that. Yes. Then I'll put you, said the hat, where you'll do the most interesting things, and then, loud enough for the hall, Gryffindor. The noise from the Gryffindor table was considerable. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, and walked toward the red and gold table with the specific unhurried quality of someone who has been applauded by considerably more demonstrative audiences, which he had. The residents of Pentagram City celebrated things with actual fire. He sat next to Ron, who looked genuinely pleased. Hermione, from across the table, gave him the approving look of someone whose predictions had been confirmed. Neville, beside her, was smiling the wide, uncomplicated smile of someone who was happy about something without needing to analyze it. From further up the table, an older student, prefect badge, sharp eyes, the specific evaluating expression of someone assessing how much trouble a first year is about to cause, looked at Harry with frank assessment. Harry looked back at him. After a moment, Percy Weasley, for it was Percy, as Harry would learn shortly, returned to his plate with the expression of a man who has revised a calculation without reaching its conclusion yet. The feast was remarkable and Harry ate it with the appetite of someone who had been awake since 6 and had spent the day managing an extraordinary number of social assessments. The food was legitimately excellent. Not better than Hell's best. Hell had a bakery district that Harry would miss for years, but excellent in a different, warmer way, the way food is excellent when it's made for a specific place and occasion. Ron ate with the uncomplicated pleasure that was becoming Harry's favorite thing about him. Hermione ate with the slight distraction of someone simultaneously cataloging information about their new environment. Neville ate with the careful happiness of someone who has, against certain expectations, ended up somewhere they belong. Harry ate and listened and watched and felt Hogwarts around him, the castle alive in the deep, ancient way he'd felt on the lake, warm and large and saturated with centuries of accumulated magic. It was not hell. It was not home in the way the tower was home. But it was real, and it was his, and sitting in the noise and warmth of the great hall with the food and the candles and the specific beautiful chaos of 400 people beginning a year together, he felt the same thing he'd felt on the lake. Something beginning. He looked up at the staff table. Dumbledore was looking at him, not covertly, openly, with those bright blue eyes and the expression of a man who has revised his plans and is beginning to revise his expectations and has not yet decided whether he finds this delightful or alarming. Harry raised his goblet, slightly, in acknowledgement. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled. He raised his own. At the end of the table, Quirrell was not looking at anything in particular with the specific deliberateness of something that was being very careful not to look at Harry directly. The thing behind him was more careful still. Still and quiet and banked and waiting. Harry filed it again. Patient. He had time. After the feast, after the prefect-led procession to Gryffindor Tower and the introductions to the common room and the moving staircases and the portrait of the fat lady and everything else that was exactly what it was supposed to be and also, somehow, more, McGonagall found him in the corridor. "A word, Mr. Potter," she said. She led him to a small office off the first floor, clearly a secondary space, used for exactly these kinds of conversations, and stood with her hands folded and her expression in the careful neutral of someone who has prepared a set of questions and is now revising them in real time. "You look well," she said finally. It seemed to come out instead of something else. "Thank you, Professor. The headmaster has been," she stopped. Selected a new sentence. "We have been very concerned about your welfare." "I understand," Harry said. "I was well looked after." "By," she paused. "Your guardian. We were unable to locate you through any of the usual channels. The headmaster had believed you were with your aunt and uncle." "I was, briefly," Harry said. "Then I wasn't." McGonagall looked at him with those sharp, assessing eyes. In them, Harry read a very large number of questions in an orderly queue, and underneath them, the specific emotion of someone who has been worried about something for a long time and is now recalibrating that worry into something more complex. "Your magical signature," she said carefully, "is unusual." "Yes," he said. "The headmaster will want to speak with you." "I know. I look forward to it." She studied him. "You are not what I expected," she said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said. "I know," Harry said again. And then, because he respected her directness and it deserved matching, "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm not hiding anything dangerous. I'm just, not what anyone planned for. I think we'll all have to make our peace with that." McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the ghost of something that was almost dry amusement, 10 points to Gryffindor for honesty. A pause. "Go to bed, Mr. Potter. You have classes tomorrow." He went. In the dormitory, Ron was already half asleep and Neville was feeding his toad and the two other boys, Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, were having a comfortable argument about something with the ease of people who had already sorted themselves into friendliness. Harry sat on his bed, a real bed, a Hogwarts four-poster with red hangings, and took out his notebook and wrote the day's entry with the systematic detail Alastor had required of him since he was 7. He wrote about the alley and the train and the hat and the feast, and at the end he wrote about Quirrell, carefully, in the cipher they'd agreed on, the one that broadcast to Alastor's frequency if you read the first letter of every sentence. Then he put the notebook away and looked up at the red hangings and felt the castle settle around him, vast and warm and old, full of living magic that recognized him the way the fire had at 7 years old. Outside, through the window, the grounds were dark and the lake was still and the sky was full of stars with no hellfire to compete with them, just the clean deep dark of an English September night with all the normal stars doing their normal, excellent work. Harry had been in one place for 5 years and now he was somewhere entirely new, and it was strange in the way that change is strange, and also good in the way that change is good when you've been prepared for it by someone who understood that preparation was love in its most practical form. He thought about Alastor, briefly, warmly, with the ease of someone who carries a relationship lightly because it's solid enough not to need constant checking. Then he went to sleep. In the morning, everything would begin. Chapter 4, Classes, Curses, and the Fine Art of Not Being Boring. The first morning at Hogwarts arrived with grey light through the dormitory windows and the sound of Ron Weasley having a complicated relationship with his alarm clock. Harry was already dressed. He'd been up at 6, habit, as immovable as the castle walls, and had spent the first hour in the window seat with his notebook and sable on his shoulder, writing the previous day's full account with the systematic detail that Alastor's training had made as natural as breathing. When he was done, he folded the letter, tied it to Sable's leg, and opened the window. She departed with the regal contempt of an owl that considered dawn deliveries beneath her but was willing to make an exception. Ron surfaced from his blankets at 6:30 with the expression of someone losing a referendum against consciousness. Neville was already up, moving quietly around his bedside table and talking softly to his toad. Seamus and Dean were engaged in a competition to see who could get dressed most efficiently while still technically asleep. "You've been up for ages," Ron said, looking at Harry's made bed and notebook with mild accusation. "Since 6, Harry confirmed. "Why?" "Habit." Ron considered this. "In hell," he said, "do they just not let you sleep in?" "Alastor starts lessons at dawn," Harry said. "He has opinions about the hours between 6 and 8 being the most honest part of the day." Ron pulled his robes over his head. "The most honest part of the day," he repeated, in the tone of someone who would need time to process this. "He says the brain hasn't had time to start performing yet," Harry said. "Everything you think before 7 is actually what you think." Ron emerged from his robes and looked at Harry with a gaze that was more awake than his body suggested. "That's either brilliant or deeply concerning," he said. "He's usually both," Harry said. The great hall at breakfast was a different atmosphere from the feast, looser, more personal, the formal magic of the occasion replaced by the comfortable noise of 400 people doing the ordinary work of eating before a day of things. The Morning Post arrived in a cascade of owls that Harry watched with genuine appreciation for the logistics. The sheer organizational complexity of routing that many birds to that many specific people was, in its own way, impressive. Sable wasn't back yet. He wasn't concerned. She knew where she was going. Hermione appeared at their section of the Gryffindor table with her timetable already annotated and a book open beside her breakfast, which Harry found entirely reasonable. Ron looked at her timetable organization with the expression of a man who would like to appear above such things but was actually curious. "We have transfiguration first," she said, "then charms, then herbology, then history of magic." "Who teaches transfiguration?" Harry asked. "McGonagall," Ron and Hermione said simultaneously, then exchanged a look of mutual minor surprise. "She transforms into a cat," Ron added. "As a demonstration. My brothers say she does it every year for first years." Harry looked at his schedule. "And Defense Against the Dark Arts is Thursday," he said. "With Quirrell," Hermione said, with the slight caution of someone who had read enough to know that the Dada post had a history. Harry looked at his schedule a moment longer, then put it away and addressed his breakfast. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him with the expression of someone working through a puzzle. Harry noted this without looking directly at him. He'd been doing that since Madame Malkin's, tracking Malfoy in his peripheral vision with the same attention he'd give anything he'd assessed as interesting but not immediately dangerous. Malfoy was intelligent enough to be worth watching. He wasn't yet interesting enough to require more. McGonagall's classroom had the atmosphere of her personality made architectural, precise and functional and slightly demanding, with the specific quality of a space where things were expected of you. The desks were arranged in orderly rows. The blackboard had today's objective already written in neat, authoritative chalk. The cat sitting on the desk at the front of the room was Minerva McGonagall, and she became Minerva McGonagall in the 3 seconds after the last student sat down, and the transformation was exactly as clean and certain as everything else about her. Half the class gasped. Several people applauded. Harry watched with genuine interest, not at the spectacle, but at the mechanics. Transfiguration of the self was something significantly more complex than object transfiguration, and the quality of McGonagall's control was evident in how effortlessly she managed the shift of form. In Hell, entities that could alter their fundamental nature were the most powerful category of being. McGonagall's animagus transformation was a human-scale version of that same principle. He wanted to learn it. He made a note. Transfiguration, McGonagall said, from behind her desk, in the voice of someone launching a subject they took extremely seriously, is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone who is not paying attention will leave and not return. She surveyed the room with eyes that meant it. We will begin with the theory. She was a good teacher. Harry had encountered a range of teachers in Hell. Alastor's method was brilliant but wildly idiosyncratic, and the other tutors and entities he'd learned from occupied the full spectrum from excellent to memorable for the wrong reasons. McGonagall was good in the specific way of someone who understood both her subject and her students, who had clear standards and the patience to hold them without rigidity, and who found genuine pleasure in the work. He respected it. The practical component involved turning a matchstick into a needle. Most students produced minor deformations, matches that were sort of metallic at one end, or had thinned slightly with aspirations toward needleness. Ron got one that was silver but still flat. Hermione got a perfect needle in under 4 minutes and then spent the rest of the class reading ahead. Harry looked at his matchstick for a moment. He thought about what Alastor had said about transfiguration. He discussed it once, in the context of the nature of form. The difference between what a thing is and what it could be is a function of will applied to truth. Magic is the mechanism. He thought about the matchstick's nature. He thought about the needle's nature. He considered the precise relationship between them. He turned it into a needle. Then, without particular fuss, he turned it back into a matchstick. Then into a needle again. Then back. McGonagall was beside him before he'd completed the third iteration. She looked at the matchstick on the desk with the expression she'd worn in the corridor last night: assessment, recalibration, and something more. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor. Most first years find a single transformation adequately challenging." "I know," he said. "I was checking whether the process was reversible or whether reversal required a separate action." "And?" "Same action. Just, backwards. The intentional direction of it matters more than the specific motion." He looked up at her. "Is that consistent with the theory?" McGonagall regarded him for a moment. Then she said, "Stay after class." She asked him 3 questions after class, with Ron and Hermione waiting in the corridor, Ron with patient loyalty, Hermione with the suppressed urgency of someone who also wanted to ask things and was managing the impulse with difficulty. The questions were, where had he learned the theoretical framework he was applying, how long had he been studying, and did he have formal instruction in wand work? He answered honestly, Alastor's education, 5 years, and yes, under a wand maker who had combined theoretical and practical instruction. McGonagall listened to all 3 answers with the careful attention of someone taking a genuine inventory. "Your guardian," she said. "Alastor." "Yes." A pause. "The headmaster will want to assess your level formally," she said. "To determine appropriate coursework." "I'd welcome that," Harry said. And he meant it. He was genuinely curious what the assessment would show. He had a strong sense of his own abilities, but the gap between what you knew and what could be externally verified was itself informative. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment with those sharp eyes. "You are," she said, carefully, "a very unusual student, Mr. Potter." "I know," he said. "Is that a problem?" A pause. "Ask me again at the end of term," she said, and there was something in it that was, Harry thought, the beginning of amusement, though she'd sooner give up her animagus form than let it reach her face. "Go. You'll be late for Charms." Charms was Professor Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and had the bouncing energy of someone in love with their subject, which Harry found immediately endearing. The theory component was clear and well structured, delivered with the kind of warmth that made you feel like the subject was inherently exciting, which, for charms, Harry thought it genuinely was. Charms were different from Hellfire in the way that a river is different from an ocean, same element, different scale and nature, with specific advantages to each. Wand-based charm work was precise in a way that Hellfire wasn't, and that precision had applications that raw power didn't. Harry was genuinely interested in learning how the mechanisms fit together. Flitwick called on Hermione twice in the first 20 minutes, and both times she answered with the focused accuracy of someone who had genuinely prepared, and the second time Flitwick said, "Excellent, Miss Granger, outstanding," and Hermione's expression was one of contained, radiant satisfaction. Harry watched her and felt the specific pleasure of observing someone excellent at what they loved. When Flitwick got to Harry, with the specific note in his voice of a small man who had genuinely been looking forward to this moment, Harry answered the question about wand core resonance theory with enough depth that Flitwick's eyebrows went up and his whole small face rearranged itself into the expression of someone who has just received an unexpected gift. "Remarkable," Flitwick said. "Mr. Potter, where did you," he stopped. "Made a visible decision. We will need to discuss your placement. After class, if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all," Harry said. Ron, beside him, was looking at Harry with the resigned expression of someone who has decided to be friends with a situation rather than argue with it. "Is every class going to end with a professor keeping you after?" he asked, in a low voice. "Probably not history of magic," Harry said. It was not history of magic. Herbology was outdoors in the greenhouses, which Harry found interesting in the specific way of someone who had learned botany in a dimensional space with different flora. The plants in Greenhouse 1 were ordinary magical plants, not the advanced material, but foundational, the building blocks. He worked alongside Ron and Neville and found that Neville, who had been anxiously incompetent at most of the morning's work, was in the greenhouse with his hands in soil doing something that looked entirely different. He was good. Not good in a trying hard way, good in the way that means native fluency, instinctive and unforced. His hands knew what they were doing. He spoke to the plants quietly while he worked, under his breath, and they responded. "You're excellent at this," Harry said. Neville looked up with the expression of someone who expected the compliment to have a but attached. When it didn't come, something shifted in his face. "I like plants," he said, slightly defensively, as if this was a confession he'd been punished for before. "I noticed," Harry said. "My guardian's contact in hell grew things in a greenhouse. He said the most important thing in botany was letting the plant tell you what it needed. You do that." Neville looked at him for a moment. "Your guardian," he said carefully. "The demon one." "Yes." A pause, and then, with genuine curiosity rather than alarm, is it very different there?" "Than here?" "Very," Harry said. "But not worse. Just different kinds of alive." Neville thought about this with the concentrated seriousness of someone giving a question its proper weight. "I think I'd like to see it someday," he said, quietly. "The plants, at least." Harry looked at him. "I'll ask," he said, and meant it. History of Magic was, as predicted, not followed by a professor requesting a private word. This was because Professor Binns, a ghost who had died at his desk and continued teaching out of habit, delivered his lesson with all the dynamic energy of a man who had been telling the same story for decades and had lost interest in whether anyone was receiving it. The content was actually interesting, Harry noted. The goblin rebellions of the early 18th century had genuine geopolitical complexity and the magical theory underlying them was worth understanding, but Binns delivered it with such absolute absence of investment that by 20 minutes in, a third of the class was either asleep or had achieved a state adjacent to it. Harry took notes. He'd been taught by Alastor, who could make anything interesting, and by various hell-based tutors, several of whom had been engaging purely as a survival mechanism, and by at least 2 entities who gave their lessons while doing 5 other things simultaneously. He was capable of extracting information from a suboptimal delivery. He took thorough notes. He would find this useful later. Ron, beside him, was doing the thing that wasn't quite sleeping but wasn't quite waking, head propped on his hand, quill making the occasional aspirational mark on his parchment. Hermione was writing with focused intensity, clearly operating on the principle that if Binns was saying it, it was technically possible it would be on an exam. Neville, across the aisle, had fallen asleep with such genuine peace that Harry decided not to judge it. The week built. Days accumulated into a rhythm, early mornings and classes and the specific texture of learning in a new place with new frameworks, which was something Harry had been taught to treat as resource rather than discomfort. Every day he wrote to Alastor and every day he spent the late evenings in the common room with Ron and Hermione, and the three of them fell into the easy configuration of people who have compatible intelligences, Hermione's depth and precision, Ron's instinct and strategic thinking, Harry's synthesis and observation, all three of them better for the combination. Hermione asked about Hell every few days, in the specific focused way of someone building a research file. Harry answered thoroughly, because she asked good questions and good questions deserved good answers. Ron asked about it differently, less research, more conversation, and Harry answered those differently too, more freely, with the warmth that Ron's uncomplicated interest made easy. Draco Malfoy was a persistent background presence. He found Harry in the corridor on Wednesday, not aggressively, more with the air of someone who had been thinking about their conversation in Madame Malkin's and had arrived at several conclusions he wanted to test. "You're not what anyone expected," Malfoy said. "So I keep hearing," Harry said. "You're not, you don't care about any of the things you're supposed to care about," Malfoy said, with the slight frustration of someone whose social framework is failing to accommodate a new variable. "The hero of the wizarding world. You should be," he stopped. "What?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. "Grateful," Malfoy said. "Or proud. Or, something. You should want something from this." "I want to learn things," Harry said. "I want good friends. I want to understand what I'm capable of." He looked at Malfoy. "What do you want?" Malfoy seemed genuinely thrown by the question. "To my family," he stopped again. And Harry, who had spent 5 years watching beings navigate the gap between what they were and what they'd been told to be, saw something flicker in Malfoy's face that was younger than everything else about his performance. "That's a different question than what you want," Harry said, not unkindly. Malfoy's expression went briefly raw and then went back to composed. "You're strange," he said, which was, Harry thought, the most honest thing Draco Malfoy had said to him. "Yes," Harry agreed. Malfoy looked at him for a moment. Then he left, which was its own kind of answer. Thursday arrived and with it defense against the dark arts, and Harry walked into Quirrell's classroom with the specific quality of attention he'd been holding since the feast, surface relaxed, interior extremely alert, the kind of layered awareness Alastor had spent years building in him for exactly this kind of situation. The classroom smelled wrong. Not overwhelmingly, not in a way most people would notice, but underneath the garlic that hung in thick bunches from every available surface, there was something else. A secondary smell, cold and dry and old, like stone that had never seen sunlight. Harry logged at the moment he crossed the threshold and let nothing register on his face. Quirrell himself was a study in performance. The stutter was careful, too careful, with the specific quality of something practiced until it seemed natural, except that practiced natural and genuine natural had different textures, and Harry had been trained to read that difference in beings considerably more sophisticated than a nervous professor. The nervousness itself was real, but its source was not what it appeared to be. A man would be nervous differently than a man who had something behind him that was watching through his eyes. Harry sat in the middle of the room, not the back, where you learned nothing, not the front, where you were the primary focal point. The middle, where you could observe everyone and be partly observed. The lesson was on dark creatures. Quirrell talked about them with a quality that was, Harry thought, wrong in an interesting direction. Most people discussed dangerous things with either appropriate fear or academic detachment or the practiced ease of expertise. Quirrell discussed them with something that was almost the opposite of fear, a kind of removed familiarity that was trying to wear nervousness as camouflage. The stutter got worse when he mentioned specific forms of dark magic, and Harry noticed that the stutter was worse precisely at the moments when the thing behind him was paying the closest attention to its own concealment. You get sloppy when you're interested, Harry thought, at the concealed presence. Not directed, just the internal observation of someone reading something carefully. The cold thing behind Quirrell's eyes didn't move. But it was listening. He could feel it the way you feel a gaze between shoulder blades, the directional quality of attention. He was careful to be entirely ordinary for the rest of the lesson. After Dada, in the corridor, Hermione walked beside Harry with the expression she wore when she was containing something. "Quirrell," she said, when they were far enough from the classroom. "I know," Harry said. His hands were shaking but not with nerves, she said. When he talked about the Cruciatus curse, his hands stilled completely, which is the opposite of what you'd expect from someone with a fear-based nervous condition. She looked at Harry. "You noticed." "Before the lesson," Harry said. She absorbed this. "What do you think it is?" Harry looked at her for a moment. He had a high opinion of Hermione Granger's intelligence and a matching sense that she was trustworthy, not just honest, but trustworthy, the specific quality of someone who would handle information correctly. He thought about how much to say. "Something sharing his space," he said. "Something old and cold and being very careful." Hermione was quiet for 3 steps. "Related to Voldemort," she said, without flinching at the name, which Harry added to his list of things he liked about her. "Possibly directly," Harry said. "Don't push on it. Watch and note." She nodded. Her expression was the one she wore when she'd received information that upgraded her threat assessment but hadn't changed her basic approach to things, which was, carefully, thoroughly, and without panic. "Should we tell someone?" she asked. "Not yet," Harry said. "I'm still building the picture. Incomplete information to Dumbledore might move things faster than I want them to move." She looked at him sidelong. "You want to control the timing." "I want to understand it before I hand it to someone else," Harry said. "There's a difference between informing someone and giving them a problem. I'd rather give Dumbledore a complete picture than a piece of one." Hermione thought about this. "That's strategically sound," she said. "Though ethically slightly complicated." "Most good strategies are," Harry said. She almost smiled. "You sound like a very specific kind of adult." "I was raised by one," he said. The practical demonstration came Friday afternoon. It wasn't planned. It wasn't, Harry would say later, even his choice, it was more the situation making a choice and him responding to it, which was how Alastor had always said the most significant moments worked. You didn't get to pick the test. You got to pick the response. Friday afternoon was free period, and Harry and Ron were in the courtyard while Hermione was in the library doing something she'd been thinking about since Wednesday. The courtyard was busy with 3rd and 4th years, and there was a particular cluster of them near the far wall, Slytherins, 5th years, with the specific energy of a group that had identified a target. The target was Neville. Harry saw it before he was close enough to hear what was being said, Neville's posture, shoulders curled inward, Toad clutched to his chest, that specific physical language of someone who had been told too many times that they were less. 3 5th years and the pointed amusement of people who considered this entertaining. Ron's expression had gone tight. He'd taken a step forward. Harry put a hand on his arm, not stopping, just coordinating, and they crossed the courtyard together with exactly the unhurried pace that communicated something without announcing it. The 5th years saw them coming. One of them, biggest, most committed to the performance, looked at Harry with the comfortable authority of someone 4 years older and said, "1st years, wrong courtyard." "Is there a sign?" Harry asked. "A beat." "It's understood," said the 5th year. "By whom?" "Another beat." The 5th year's eyes moved to Harry's face with a slightly different attention, assessing the lack of appropriate anxiety and finding it confusing. "You're Potter," he said. "Yes," Harry said, pleasantly. "You should know better," the 5th year said, with the tone of someone who had decided to be magnanimous. "Run along, Anne," he stopped. He stopped because the air around Harry had done something. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a column of fire or a seismic event. It was subtler than that, a shift in temperature, localized, a degree or two warmer than the October air had any reason to be, and a quality of presence that expanded outward the way sound expands from a struck bell. Not aggressive. Not a threat. Just, there. Fully, undeniably there, in a way that made everything within 10 feet of Harry suddenly very aware that something significant was nearby. The Hellfire was controlled. Harry didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. It was just, him, fully present, the way he'd learned to be in rooms full of demons who could sense weakness the way sharks sensed blood. He hadn't needed to be anything other than himself in a long time, because himself was already enough. The fifth year looked at him. The courtyard had gone quiet in the radius effect way that happened when something registered subconsciously before it registered consciously. Harry looked at the fifth year with the patient, interested gaze of someone who had been interrupted mid-thought. "We'll stay in the courtyard," he said. "I don't think there's a problem with that." The fifth year swallowed. He made a decision that was visible only in the quality of his next breath, the deflation of a performance that had run out of audience. He looked at his friends. The group found somewhere else to be. The courtyard resumed its business, slightly louder than before, the way sound fills back into space after something passes through it. Neville was looking at Harry with wide eyes. "What did you do?" he said. "Nothing," Harry said. "You did something." "I was just, there," Harry said, and it was the most accurate description. He looked at Neville properly. "Are you all right?" Neville blinked. He seemed to need a moment to shift from the aftermath of the confrontation to the genuine question. Yes. They do that sometimes." "I'm not," he stopped. "Tried again." "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," Ron said, with the directness of someone who'd watched siblings navigate Hogwarts social dynamics for years. Neville looked at them both, at Ron's honest irritation and Harry's steady calm, and something in his face moved in the direction of something better. "You didn't have to," he started. "We were here," Harry said simply. "That's enough." Neville held his toad very carefully and nodded, and didn't say anything else, but the way he walked back to the common room with them was different from the way he'd walked to the courtyard. That evening Harry was in the window seat of the common room when Sable returned, and with her came a letter in the handwriting that was at once the most familiar thing in the world and immediately, deeply settling, not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed that the distance was navigable. That Alastor was there. The letter was 2 pages and characteristically Alastor, precise, wry, with observations that managed to be both analytical and, underneath the analysis, warmly attentive. He had thoughts about Quirrell that confirmed Harry's assessment and added 3 details Harry hadn't considered, based on historical context about the period of Quirrell's gap year. He had thoughts about McGonagall that were complementary in the specific way Alastor complimented people, which was to acknowledge competence rather than personality. He had a question about Hermione Granger's reasoning patterns that suggested he'd read Harry's description with close attention. At the end, in the slightly different quality that was Alastor being less armored than usual, there was a single line: "The castle is lucky to have you in it. Don't let it know I said so." Harry read this last line twice, smiled once, and put the letter away. Ron, from across the common room, had been watching with the comfortable nosiness of someone who wasn't trying to read the letter but was interested in Harry's face. "Good news," he said. "It's from my guardian," Harry said. Ron's expression was the one Harry had come to recognize as Ron processing the ongoing reality of Harry's situation and choosing to be easy about it because it was easier for both of them. "Did you tell him about the courtyard thing?" "Yesterday's letter," Harry said. "He'll respond in 2 days." Ron nodded. "What's he like?" he asked. "I know you've told me things. But what's he like?" Harry thought about it, genuinely, the way the question deserved. "He's the most interesting person I've ever met," he said. "And not always comfortable. He expects a great deal, and he doesn't soften things that don't deserve softening." A pause. But he's honest about everything. Even the things that would be easier not to say. He looked at Ron. And he's funny. In a very specific, slightly terrifying way. Ron absorbed this. Sounds like someone who'd be exhausting to live with. It was, Harry said. And also the best thing that ever happened to me. Ron was quiet for a moment with the consideration of someone who has a large, noisy family and understands complicated love. Right, he said. That makes sense. They sat in comfortable quiet. The fire in the Gryffindor common room crackled its ordinary, modest fire, nothing like Hell's Rivers, just a hearth fire doing its simple excellent work. Hermione came back from the library at 8 with the expression of someone who had found something significant and was deciding how to present it. She sat down and opened her book and said, without preamble, the third-floor corridor. Harry looked at her. The one that's been declared off-limits, she said. I found a reference in Hogwarts, a history to a chamber beneath the school that predates the founders. The restriction this year is new. It went into effect over the summer. She looked at Harry over her book. Whatever's being kept there was moved recently. Harry turned this over. Recently as in, the same month Gringotts reported a break-in to Vault 713, she said. Which is a vault that was emptied on the 31st of July. A pause. Your birthday, Ron said to Harry, slowly. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked at Harry. Something moved between them that was the specific understanding of two people who have arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. Something was moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts, Harry said. Something someone already tried to steal, Hermione said. And Quirrell, Harry said. Was at Gringotts the same day, Hermione said quietly. According to the public log of Ministry staff and associates. The fire crackled. Neville, asleep in an armchair across the room, made a small contented sound. Ron looked between them. Right, he said. So we've got a possessed professor, a stolen thing, and a corridor. He picked up his chess piece from the board beside him and turned it over in his fingers with the focused expression of someone who genuinely understood strategy. What's the thing? I don't know yet, Hermione said. Harry looked at the fire and thought about Alastor's voice saying careful, not passive, careful. We find out, he said. Carefully. And if it's what I think it is, Hermione started. Then it's more dangerous than anyone in this building currently knows, Harry said, except possibly Dumbledore. He looked at the fire a moment longer. And possibly whatever's in Quirrell. The common room was warm and the fire was ordinary, and outside the castle the October night was cool and the lake was still, and somewhere in the castle, behind a door on the 3rd floor, something was waiting with the patience of things that have waited before and expect to wait again. Harry looked at the fire, and the fire looked like nothing except a fire, and he felt the shape of what was coming the way you feel weather changing, in the bones, below the level of proof, somewhere older than thought. He was ready. He would be more ready by the time it arrived. Chapter 5, The Devils in the Details. The troll came on Halloween. Harry knew something was wrong before Quirrell's announcement, which was the point. He'd been watching Quirrell for 6 weeks with the patient, unhurried attention that Alastor had drilled into him for exactly this kind of situation, and by the end of October he had built a profile detailed enough to read the man's genuine states from his performances. The way you learn to read weather by watching it long enough to know the difference between clouds that pass and clouds that stay. Quirrell was nervous on ordinary days in the performed, studied way. On the days when the cold thing behind him was active, pushing forward, interested, wanting, the nervousness became something finer and more brittle, like glass that was already cracked trying to hold its shape. Halloween was a glass day. Harry had noted it at breakfast, filed it, and spent the day with his attention divided between his lessons and the background frequency of watching without looking. The feast was spectacular in the way of Hogwarts at its most theatrical, the great hall transformed, the enchanted ceiling doing something extraordinary with mist and bats that was genuinely beautiful, the tables loaded with food that had opinions about Halloween. Harry ate and watched and felt the quality of the evening the way you feel static before lightning. When Quirrell came through the doors. He was running, which was wrong. Everything about Quirrell was calibrated to a studied, shuffling nervousness, and running broke the performance because running required a kind of physical commitment that the performance couldn't survive. He stumbled. He grabbed the edge of the head table. He said, in a voice that was genuinely shaking for the first time, "Troll in the dungeon," and then thought you ought to know, and then he fainted, which Harry assessed as 60% performance and 40% the cold thing withdrawing quickly because the chaos it had just created was sufficient for whatever purpose it had. Dumbledore's response was immediate and organized, prefects moving students, professors deployed, the specific controlled authority of a man who has managed crises before and has a methodology. Harry let himself be moved with the Gryffindor current for approximately 30 seconds, and then he stopped. "Hermione," he said. Ron was beside him. They both knew immediately. "She's in the bathroom," Ron said. "She doesn't know." Harry was already moving against the crowd. The corridors were emptying fast, students funneling toward dormitories, the torches guttering slightly in the cross-draft of a lot of people moving quickly. Harry moved with the specific efficiency of someone who had navigated Pentagram City at full noise, reading the crowd's flow, finding the gaps, moving through rather than against. Ron was right behind him, matching pace with the ease of someone who had brothers and understood that following quickly was its own kind of competence. They found the troll first. It was enormous. Harry had read about trolls, the theoretical profile, the physiological details, the combat considerations, but reading about something and standing in a corridor looking at it were different operations, and the troll was at the upper end of what the literature described. Mountain troll. 12 feet of consolidated mass and very limited cognitive engagement, moving through the corridor with the deep, unconcerned rhythm of something that was never uncertain about its ability to break anything in its path. It hadn't seen them yet. Ron made a sound that was the sound a person makes when the reality of something exceeds the prepared-for range. Harry looked at the troll for exactly 3 seconds, assessed its movement pattern, its likely next turn, the spatial relationship between it and the sound of running water from around the corridor's bend, and said, "Bathrooms are left. It's going left." They ran. They came around the corner and into the girls' bathroom and found Hermione Granger pressed against the far wall of sinks with her hands flat on the porcelain and her face doing several things at once: fear, genuine fear, the first Harry had seen from her in 6 weeks of knowing her, but also, underneath it, the focused expression of someone who was thinking hard and fast. She hadn't stopped thinking. He respected it. "There's a troll," she said. "We know," Ron said. The wall behind them shook. The troll had found the doorway, was filling the doorway, which required some rearrangement of the doorframe, and it came through with the force of something that had not previously encountered obstacles that weren't immediately structural and found this bathroom no different. It looked at them. Its eyes were small and red and without complexity, which was its own kind of unsettling, and intelligence you could read was manageable. This wasn't intelligence. This was mass and direction and a club the size of a mature tree. Ron grabbed his wand and tried a Wingardium Leviosa with the adrenaline accuracy of someone who'd been practicing it all week, and the club went up, actually went up, Ron's timing good, the spell catching the troll's raised arm mid-swing, and the troll looked at its own ascending club with the bewilderment of something encountering a new category of problem. Harry stepped forward. He did it quietly. No announcement. No particular drama. He stepped between the troll and Hermione and he reached, not for his wand but deeper, the way Alastor had taught him, the way you reach for something you carry rather than something you hold, and the Hellfire came up around his hands with the low, certain heat of a thing that knows its own name. It was deep cardinal red, the specific color of it that meant controlled and intentional, not the brighter orange of the accidental Hellfire that had singed the tower courtyard when he was 9. It shaped itself without his needing to direct it consciously, small wings of flame along his forearms, not for burning but for presence, the same thing he'd done in the courtyard with the 5th years but fuller, more real. The troll looked at the fire. Trolls were not intelligent, but they were old, and old things had instincts built in deeper than thought, and the instinct of something old and alive encountering Hellfire was very clear and very specific. It took a step back. Harry walked toward it. Not fast. Not threateningly. Just steadily, the way Alastor walked into rooms, with the full conviction that the space was already his before he arrived in it. The fire moved with him, calm and very warm, and the troll backed up another step and then another, and its tiny red eyes were doing the only thing small eyes can do with complex information, which is to simplify it into threat and larger than me and leave. It left. Through the damaged doorframe, back into the corridor, moving at a speed that its bulk made surprisingly convincing. Harry let the hellfire settle. The warmth in his hands faded to ambient. He turned around. Hermione was looking at him. Ron was looking at him. The bathroom was full of the specific quality of aftermath, dust in the air, the faint smell of troll, the guttering of the torches that the displaced air had disturbed. Hellfire, Hermione said. Her voice was steady. She was still thinking. You used hellfire. Yes, Harry said. Without your wand. The wand focuses it. It's not the source. He looked at her properly. Are you all right? She exhaled, a long, controlled breath that was the sound of someone releasing fear that had been held for several minutes. I'm fine, she said. Yes. She pushed off the wall. The professors are going to find us here. Yes, Harry said. And we'll be in trouble, Ron said, with the tone of someone performing the expected concern without fully inhabiting it. Probably, Harry said. Are you all right with that? Ron looked at him. You just used hellfire on a mountain troll, he said. I think a detention is manageable. McGonagall found them, which was what they had expected, and her expression when she arrived, followed by Snape and Quirrell, which was the part Harry noted carefully, was the expression of someone managing a very large number of simultaneous reactions. Chief among them, relief at finding them alive, and fury at finding them in the wrong place, and something that looked hard at the scorch marks on the bathroom tile and went very still. Snape's eyes went to Harry immediately and with the specific intensity of someone who had been waiting for an excuse to apply that intensity. Snape was, Harry had concluded after 6 weeks, operating from a set of assumptions about Harry's father that had calcified over 20 years into something he treated as objective fact. It was interesting, in the sad way some things were interesting, the waste of intelligence on the maintenance of an old story. Quirrell stood slightly behind the others. The cold thing was very quiet. Had been quiet since the feast, Harry noted, withdrawn, conserved, present but not acting. Like something that had completed one step of a process and was waiting for conditions to align for the next. McGonagall's initial fury resolved, under examination of the bathroom, into something more complex. Explain, she said, which was a better word than it might have been, and contained, Harry thought, the beginning of listening. Ron explained, with the honest, slightly rushed quality of someone who hadn't rehearsed a story because everything he was saying was true. Hermione was in the bathroom, they'd gone to find her, the troll came through the doorway, Ron had levitated the club, Harry had what? McGonagall said. A pause. They all looked at Harry. Harry looked at the scorch marks on the tile. Then at McGonagall, directly. I persuaded it to leave, he said. McGonagall's eyes moved to the tile again. The marks were recognizable to someone who'd spent a career around magic. Not standard spellfire. Not wand-casting residue. Something older and hotter and more specific. I see, she said, carefully. Snape said nothing. He was looking at Harry with the quality of a man revising a file. Quirrell was looking at the scorch marks with an expression that did a very poor job of being neutral, and the thing behind his eyes was less restrained than it had been all evening, interested, now. Alive in its interest. Harry felt it the way you feel a current in water, directionless and everywhere. He didn't look at Quirrell. He looked at McGonagall. He waited. 5 points each to Gryffindor, McGonagall said, finally, for presence of mind in a dangerous situation. A pause, and her voice shifted into its standard register of expectation, and 5 points from Gryffindor each for being precisely where you were explicitly told not to be. She looked at all 3 of them. Go to your dormitory. Now. They went. In the corridor, Ron exhaled with the release of a man who has been holding a great deal of tension in his shoulders and is glad to put it down. -5 points, he said. That's basically nothing. She wasn't really angry, Hermione said. She was angry, Harry said. She just agreed with the outcome. Hermione looked at him. She saw the marks. Yes. And she chose not to press it. Hermione was quiet for a step. She's filing it. For Dumbledore. Yes, Harry said again. The headmaster is going to want to talk to you very soon, she said. I know. Are you worried about that? Ron asked. Harry thought about it honestly. No, he said. Dumbledore isn't a problem. He's a complication. There's a difference. Ron nodded with the air of someone who had decided to trust this distinction. They climbed toward Gryffindor Tower in companionable quiet, the 3 of them moving through the castle that was, an hour after the troll, settling back into its own rhythms, the torches steady again and the distant sounds of professors completing their sweep resolving into the normal ambient sound of Hogwarts at night. At the portrait hole, Hermione stopped and turned and looked at Harry with the direct, assessing gaze that she wore when she was making a decision about honesty. Thank you, she said. Not because I couldn't have managed something. But because you came. Of course we came, Ron said, slightly indignant. I know, she said. That's the point. She looked at both of them. That's the point. She went through the portrait hole first. Ron followed. Harry came last and felt, as the familiar warmth of the common room closed around them, that something had settled into place, not dramatically, not with announcement, just the quiet click of something fitting into where it belonged. The 3 of them. That was what that felt like. Alastor arrived on a Saturday in mid-November. Harry knew he was coming before he saw him because Sable returned from her morning delivery with a particular quality of urgency and also, more specifically, because the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall did something unusual at breakfast, a brief flicker, like a signal passing through, warm and radio frequency in character, there and gone in less than a second. Harry looked up at it and set his toast down. What? Ron asked. My guardian is in the country, Harry said. A pause. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look. How do you know? Hermione asked. He broadcasts, Harry said. It's hard to explain without the theory. But I know what his frequency feels like. Hermione looked up at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was adding a new category to her mental filing system. He can broadcast through an enchanted ceiling, she said. Through most things, Harry said. Another pause. Is he coming here? Ron asked, with a tone that was carefully balanced between interest and the mild anxiety of someone about to meet the person who raised Harry in hell. He's already here, said a voice. The voice came from behind them, from the doorway of the Great Hall, with the quality that Harry had grown up with and that still, after 5 years, had a register that was immediately, fully present, the way certain notes fill a room. The static was there, warm and layered, and the Great Hall's ambient noise dipped slightly as heads turned toward the doorway with the subconscious response of people who had heard something that their instincts ranked as significant. Alastor stood in the doorway of the Great Hall. He was wearing his traveling things, which were different from his everyday things only in minor details, slightly more formal at the collar, walking stick held with the edge of ceremonial rather than functional, red-black jacket without the static discharge quality it had in Hell's Air. He looked like a very well-dressed man with red eyes and a smile that was doing several jobs simultaneously, and he looked across the Great Hall with the particular gaze of someone who is taking inventory of a new space. The Great Hall registered him the way it had registered Harry on the first night, that subterranean awareness, the ambient magic of the room doing the equivalent of sitting up straighter. Several professors at the head table had turned. Dumbledore was looking with an expression that was intensely, carefully interested. McGonagall had gone very still in the way she went still when something required complete attention. Snape was looking at Alastor the way a large predator looks at another large predator, not aggressive, but not casual. Harry stood up. Alastor's smile shifted, the genuine one, the unguarded fraction, and then he was walking down the hall with his stick clicking on the flagstones and the great hall doing that thing around him where space seemed to acknowledge his presence as matter acknowledges gravity. Harry met him in the middle of the hall because that was where his legs had taken him without asking permission, and Alastor looked at him with those red eyes and said, "You look well," which was Alastor's version of a number of things. "You didn't say you were coming," Harry said. "I said I would visit. I didn't specify when." Alastor looked at him with the full, assessing attention of someone who has been reading letters about a person and is now comparing the letters to the reality. 5 points from Gryffindor, he said, lightly. Troll incident. I read about it. We got 5 points first, Harry said. I know. Net 0. McGonagall is precise. A pause. You used Hellfire in a school bathroom. It was appropriate to the situation. I didn't say it wasn't. Alastor tilted his head. I said you used it in a school bathroom. I'm noting the context. Around them, the Great Hall had resumed something like its normal noise level, but with the specific quality of 400 people trying to look like they weren't paying attention while entirely paying attention. Harry was aware of it and didn't care about it, which was itself a product of 5 years in a city where you were always observed and had learned to let observation be irrelevant. Come and meet my friends, Harry said. Alastor looked at him for a beat. Something moved in his expression that was, Harry had learned to read it, a particular kind of satisfaction, the kind that was about something larger than the immediate moment. Lead the way, he said. Ron's preparation for this meeting had consisted primarily of being told about Alastor for 6 weeks and arriving at the conclusion that preparation was probably irrelevant. He sat up straight when Alastor arrived at the Gryffindor table and looked at him with the honest assessment of someone who had decided in advance to be okay with whatever he found. Alastor looked back at Ron with the brief, thorough regard that was his standard evaluation of anything new. Ron Weasley, Alastor said. Not a question. He'd read the letters. Sir, Ron said. Then, with the slight correction of someone who has decided formality is fine but shouldn't be mistaken for uncertainty, it's good to meet you. Alastor seemed to find this answer acceptable. Your chess, he said. Harry tells me you think 3 moves ahead. Usually 4, Ron said. Something in Alastor's expression approved of the correction. He looked at Hermione. Hermione, who had been sitting with the specific containment of someone who has a great deal they would like to say and is determining the right order, looked at Alastor with direct, assessing eyes. You're the Radio Demon, she said. I am, Alastor agreed. I've been researching you, she said. The available literature is inadequate. The primary sources are biased and the secondary ones are working from incomplete foundations. She paused. I have questions. Alastor looked at her for a moment with the expression Harry recognized as genuine interest making contact with an unexpected surface. I find, he said, that I have time for questions. He sat down across from her with the ease of someone installing himself in a space. Start with the most interesting one. Hermione opened her mouth. Then she stopped, reconsidered the whole list, and said, what is the actual mechanism of your broadcasting ability? The literature describes it as a power but not a how. Alastor looked at her. Then he looked at Harry. Keep this one, he said. I intend to, Harry said. They found a room, one of the castle's smaller sitting rooms on the 2nd floor that was unoccupied on Saturday mornings, and Alastor sat with the 3 of them for 2 hours in a conversation that was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. He answered Hermione's questions with the exact precision of someone who respects the quality of the inquiry, deflected the ones that were genuinely private with such elegant redirection that she was satisfied before she noticed, and asked questions back that were pointed enough to be genuinely engaging. He talked to Ron about strategy, chess specifically, but the underlying framework that chess was a model for, in a way that made Ron sit forward and stop tracking how smart he was supposed to sound and just talk, which Harry watched with quiet pleasure because it was the thing Alastor had done with him at 6 years old at a kitchen table, and it was the same now. The quality of someone who makes you feel that your intelligence is being taken seriously. He talked to Harry last and mostly through implication, glances and the specific language of people who have spent 5 years building a private vocabulary of tone and pause and the direction of silence. But at one point, when Hermione and Ron were in a side conversation about something she'd found in the library, Alastor said quietly, "Quirrell." "Yes," Harry said. "You've been watching." "Everything you told me to watch for," Harry said. "It's there. The second presence. It's old and cold and it knows about me." A pause. "It was interested in the bathroom. The Hellfire interested it." Alastor looked at his walking stick, turning it slightly between his fingers. "It will be interested in a great deal more before this is over," he said. "The thing in the corridor," he paused. "I have a theory about what they moved from Gringotts." "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. Alastor stilled. "Then, you have more than a theory." Hermione found the connection. "Flamel's research, the Gringotts break-in, the vault number. The stone makes an immortality serum. If someone was working from a severely weakened state and needed time to rebuild, they'd want it desperately," Alastor said. "Yes." Harry met his eyes. "And they're in this building." Alastor was quiet for a moment. Outside the sitting room, the castle went about its Saturday business, ordinary and warm and completely uninformed about what was sitting in a second-floor room with its own conclusions. "What will you do?" Alastor asked. And it was the question he always asked when they'd reached the point where Harry had to make a choice rather than gather information, not "what should you do" or "what do I recommend," but "what will you do," because for 5 years that was how he'd been taught that knowledge and action were personally connected. "Watch Quirrell," Harry said. "Keep building the picture. Tell Dumbledore when the picture is complete enough to be useful." A pause. "Protect the stone if it comes to that." "And if it comes to that last part before you're ready?" Harry looked at him steadily. "Then I'll be as ready as I am." Alastor looked at him for a long moment with those red ancient eyes. "Good answer," he said, in a voice that was quiet. Real. The voice he used when he meant things without the performance layer. Across the room, Ron and Hermione had resolved their side conversation and were looking at them both. "Is everything all right?" Hermione asked. "Yes," Harry said. "We were discussing strategy," Alastor said, and his smile came back in its public version, sharp and bright and doing several jobs. "Miss Granger. Your question about the broadcasting mechanism. I'll give you the framework, but the detail requires some theoretical foundations first. What do you know about the relationship between identity and dimensional resonance?" Hermione leaned forward. "Start from the beginning," she said. "I want to understand it properly." Alastor looked as though Saturday had just become worth being in England for. Dumbledore found them at noon. Or rather, found Alastor. Harry suspected that Dumbledore had known precisely where they were for most of the morning and had decided on noon as the appropriate hour for the intervention, which was itself a statement about Dumbledore's approach. He didn't intercept. He gave space and then made contact at the moment of his choosing. He knocked, which Harry found interesting. The castle was his. He didn't need to knock. "Come in," Harry said. Dumbledore opened the door and surveyed the room, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Alastor sitting around the small table with its accumulated evidence of a long conversation, with those bright, sharp eyes doing their work. "Alastor," he said. The name was warm. Complicated. The warmth of someone who knew the person well enough to have feelings about seeing them that were not simple. "Albus," said Alastor, in a tone of someone who finds the situation deeply entertaining. "You look well. The beard is new." "The beard has been present for 40 years, Dumbledore said mildly. He looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter. I wonder if I might borrow your guardian for a short time." He's not borrowed, Harry said. He can choose. Dumbledore looked at him with those eyes that were blue and very clear. Indeed he can, he said, and there was something genuine in it, not condescension corrected, but the real acknowledgement of a man who was, Harry thought, genuinely open to revising his understanding of things. Then, Alastor, would you do me the honor? Alastor rose with the particular ease of a man who has been waiting for this and found the weight appropriately calibrated. He looked at Harry before he left, the brief look that communicated several things, chief among them, I have this, and also I'll tell you everything, and also you've been excellent today. Harry read all of it. I'll be in the library, Hermione said, after the door closed. She said it with the specific fact-stating quality of someone who needed to do something with the accumulated energy of a morning full of extraordinary information. I'll come, Ron said, with the quality of someone who wouldn't be reading but would be present, which was its own form of company. Harry stayed in the sitting room for a moment after they left, alone with the residual warmth of the last 2 hours and the specific satisfying weight of a day that had contained exactly what it needed to. Through the window, the November grounds were gray and bare, the lake flat and still under a sky that had been promising snow for 2 weeks without following through. He looked at it and thought about the third-floor corridor, and the stone, and Quirrell's cold thing watching the Hellfire marks on the bathroom tile with its banked, patient interest. Something was building. He could feel the shape of it the way Alastor had taught him to feel the shape of coming things, not in the details, but in the structure. The way a river doesn't announce the waterfall, but the water knows. He was ready. He would be more ready still. He picked up his notebook, and wrote, he came. Everything is fine. Something is coming. And then the cipher at the end, the first letter of every sentence broadcasting on the frequency that only Alastor could read. The castle settled around him. Old and warm and full of its own deep magic, doing what it had always done, holding a great many people who were all, in their own ways, working towards something. Harry closed the notebook. He went to find his friends. Alastor left at 4 p.m, from the courtyard, with the specific quality of someone who has completed what they came to do and finds extended farewells inefficient. Harry walked with him to the place where the door would be when Alastor needed it. Dumbledore, Harry said. Is not an obstacle, Alastor said. He is a man reckoning with the difference between the story he's been telling about you and the person you actually are. A pause. He's a good enough man to manage it. Give him time and room. What did you tell him? The truth, Alastor said, in its most useful quantity. He looked at Harry with those red eyes and the grey November light, and the contrast of it, hell's colour in England's weather, was striking and, Harry thought, very accurate. I told him you were well prepared. I told him you were capable. I told him, a slight pause, that you were mine, and that I expected you to be respected accordingly. Harry absorbed this. How did he take that? With more grace than I anticipated, Alastor said, which was the highest form of compliment he applied to other people's responses to him. He is concerned about the stone. He knows more than he said to anyone about what's in Quirrell. He is going to want to act soon. Does he know what I know? He knows less, I think. He suspects the presence but hasn't confirmed it. A pause. He will, shortly. His methods are different from yours, but they're not slow. The door was there, Alastor's door, iron-fitted, slightly taller than necessary, in the space between the courtyard wall and the November hedge where a door had no architectural reason to be. You'll write, Harry said. Not a question. Every day, Alastor said, which was the echo of the agreement made in Diagon Alley and which landed the same way it always had. And if, Harry started. Broadcast, Alastor said. I'll know before you finish the sentence. Harry looked at him. In the grey November light Alastor was entirely himself, sharp and warm and ancient and, in the way that was there specifically, completely present. Harry felt the weight of the last 5 years and the weight of what was ahead and the specific, uncomplicated truth that he was 11 years old and had been made formidable and was standing in a castle in England in autumn and was not afraid of what was coming. Thank you, Harry said. For today. Thank you, Alastor said, with the precision of someone choosing the response carefully, for everything I've seen today. He looked at Harry for one more beat, that full, clear look, and then he opened the door. The warm deep smell of hell came through briefly, cedar and sulfur and the old rich smell of a place that was alive in ways that were different from England but no less real, and then Alastor stepped through and the door was gone before it had fully closed. The courtyard was cold and empty and ordinary. Harry stood in it for a moment, with the November air on his face and the castle at his back, and felt, fine. Better than fine. The word for it was something along the lines of supported, not held up, not propped, but the feeling of knowing the ground is solid under you, which is different from needing the ground to carry you. He turned around and went back into the castle. Ron was in the common room with his chess set. Hermione was on the sofa with 3 books open and her notes in the margin of each. Neville was by the fire with his potted plant making the small, careful adjustments of someone who understood exactly what it needed. Harry sat down in the remaining chair. Sable glided from her perch to his shoulder and settled there with the possessive ease of an owl who has made permanent territorial decisions. All right? Ron asked, without looking up from his board. Yes, Harry said. The fire crackled. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall over the grounds, quiet and unhurried, settling on the lake and the lawns and the edges of the forbidden forest, making everything clean and still and briefly simple. Inside, the 4 of them sat in the warm, and the evening built around them, and something at the end of the 3rd-floor corridor waited in its patient dark, and Harry looked at the fire and thought, not yet, but soon. He was ready for soon.